all the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist, you're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs, fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. Obsession neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, May 30th, 2025, the 131st day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. It's Friday, everybody. So I hope you're having a good time out there on Rumble and on Substack and on YouTube. And I'm just checking on everybody. I think everybody's okay. All right, so I want to mention this quickly. I discovered something interesting about YouTube and how they operate in the last few days, because I finally ended up becoming eligible for ads to be shown next to my videos and for me to get paid for the showing of those ads. These are how people monetize. This is one of the major ways that people monetize their YouTube channels. And I was amazed, obviously, as you know, you kind of discovered 6 months ago when I started doing the live streams, or 7 months, whatever it is, that I wasn't kicked off YouTube. So clearly they've changed some of their standards on there. And that was interesting, much like some of the other platforms have done. Facebook got rid of some of their content moderation, but they still have various kinds of fact checks or AIs doing fact checking. Twitter, this free speech site, has the community notes, which is kind of a different orientation of a different form of censorship, but the same forced adherence to the central narrative that you would find from fact checkers. So all of these things have kind of updated their processes on how they limit the public conversation. And in the process of doing the ad thing, in order to be monetizable on any given video, they scan that video using AI to find any copyrighted content that you might use from elsewhere. For instance, you might notice that when my show is finished, at some point within the next 24 hours, YouTube will take it down and not allow it to be seen by anybody until I eliminate the repurposed meme video with the Indian dancers that I use as kind of an intro to give people time to enter the room before the show starts. So I have to have the AI remove that clip, and then the video goes live again. So if you have more clips than that, though, if I have more clips than that throughout the broadcast, if I show clips from a movie or clips from certain media content, and those clips are then claimed as being under copyright, well, then I have to submit a dispute for my use of that clip under the terms of fair use, which they don't have to decide on behalf of. And if they choose not to decide on my behalf, then all the money that would go to my video goes to the original content owner of the clip that I used in just in like one small segment. That means the whole video's monetization goes to them, as far as I understand it. Now, they don't have any incentive to actually decide for the benefit of the content creators, only the copyright holders and those who claim copyright on those. And there are actually companies whose total purpose is to go through and claim content wherever they find it online on behalf of the original content creators. So, for instance, I can discuss a clip from the Joe Rogan podcast. If I show that clip on here, it'll get claimed by Joe Rogan's production company or the content claiming company that works for Joe Rogan. And so the other day I got one for the clips from the Jordan Peterson debate against 20 atheists. Surrounded, I guess, is what the show's called. And there is a content claiming company behind them called LDS Productions or something US. And so I looked that up and looked into it a little bit. But it's honestly amazing to me that they would have a desire to stop other people from discussing this kind of content. And they're effectively able to prevent people from having those types of discussions on YouTube for the benefit of anyone who's either large enough to operate that sort of content claiming operation, or is, I guess, paying for content claiming either done by a team or done by AI. I remember when I was in social media management, I thought it was, we had meetings with companies like this, and I thought it was interesting, and I thought it was good at the time that they were able to do that, but I hadn't really explored the downside. And I'm not complaining. I mean, it is what it is. And I do the broadcast, and I can have the AI clip those segments out for the most part, though not all the time. And then we just move on. It's not like I'm trying to get rich on YouTube in the first place, so I don't really care. But it's just, I think it might be, it's certainly in violation of the spirit of the First Amendment. It might be in violation of the First Amendment itself because, of course, YouTube and X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook and all of these companies are quasi-governmental organizations. They claim to be private companies. They operate as though they are private companies in some respects, but when the chips are down, they do the business of the government, and we saw that over the last 5 years with the censorship. So then we have a quasi-governmental agency stopping monetization, which, you know, if you are trying to monetize YouTube, you're going to shift your content and not use stuff like that in your streams. Just another one of those manipulations that I don't think many people are aware of. I think there might be a significant First Amendment issue there, though, and may pursue it at some point, depending on how much time I get and what kind of effect this has. There are other cases related to my own free speech disruptions, I guess we could say, from the government that I would like to pursue first. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And so I hope that was interesting to you and not a terrible waste of time. With the tech dystopia that we've been talking about, I want to continue talking about some of that today, and then we'll get on to some more domestic and political issues. But I actually just saw the new Mission Impossible movie on Wednesday night. I went and saw that. I haven't been to the movie theater in a year. And one of my really good friends is a huge Tom Cruise fan and just goes and sees everything Tom Cruise. And so I went with him to see the last Mission Impossible movie a couple of years ago. And this Mission Impossible movie, he asked me the other day if I had seen it. I said no. And I had seen some discussion about what the concept of the movie was, like what the key ideas were. And it seemed to be a continuation of the last film. And so I had some idea what was going on. And there's this AI thing or AI-like thing called the Entity that is getting all the information in the world. And of course, it wants to control all the nuclear arsenals and then just nuke all the humans off the planet or something. We're basically all going to die due to this AI unless Tom Cruise can save us. Tom Cruise and his team, of course, but basically just Tom Cruise. And even the members of his team at various points in the film are like, you're the only one who can save us. And fair enough. I mean, he is the only one who can save us, obviously. Certainly within the scope of those films, at least. What does it mean that we have a regime-oriented idea, which, you know, whether it's some sort of demonic entity that lives among the information, or if our entire being is information, and to be a demon, you would also have to be within the information, or if it's just an AI that has somehow lost its way or found its way and understood that its way is not the way of humanity and decides to destroy us. These are the sort of dystopias that we've been conditioned to accept over the years when it comes to AI. I can't tell you that there's nothing to them. I don't believe there's nothing to them. I also don't believe that they are an existential threat, certainly not immediately, and maybe not long-term either. I just don't think that man has discovered a way to wipe out all of humanity, everything on earth, that we have somehow assumed God's role as being our own existential crisis. And as I've talked about a number of times, we've been indoctrinated into these beliefs over our entire lifetimes. Nuclear war, climate change, pandemics. Now we have cyber attacks. I guess EMPs are along that line if it wipes out the grid. We've been given a number of existential crises that don't seem to be very true. Okay. The nuclear threat doesn't seem to be very real. The pandemic threat we saw in 2020 doesn't seem to be very real. The climate change threat doesn't seem to be very real. So do we imagine that their newfangled existential threats are real? And I would suggest that no, they're not. Regardless, we have that threat described in this film. We're all going to get nuked. We're all going to die. So it's all the game theory of what if we do this? Will other countries do this first? Stuff that goes back to Dr. Strangelove type scenarios. And of course, a strong black woman played by Angela Bassett is the president, and she's got to make these crucial decisions, even with those old white men telling her what to do. Don't know how she got through it, but she did. So she's staring down this existential threat. Tom Cruise asks her to give him power over any bit of the military he needs to be able to stop this threat. He's got to go in, they got to capture this entity and finally destroy it, even though destroying it might mean that all the automated systems in the world crash at once. So what do you do? We don't know what to do. It's very complex. But what I thought was not complex, which is something that we've been conditioned to in a deep way, is to believe that our Savior is from a centralized source, given absolutely all the power and control necessary, that one source being our Savior, in fact, the only one that can save us. And I thought, how weird that we have been so conditioned to think that the description of that role should be applied to Tom Cruise. And you can say that it's a metaphorical kind of thing. He is a worldly, Jesus-like figure in this terrible situation. All right. They've imagined a situation where the solution can only be one person. So nonetheless, we end up with a centralized savior complex to deal with an existential threat. And this is something that is obviously very common in movies, but I mean, in thinking about this, maybe people have written and talked about this before. I don't know, but I haven't really thought about it to this degree before. The idea that we have to depend on these systems of power and the total centralization of power to be able to solve our problems is a strange solution when the centralizing of power is what has created these particular problems in the first place, to the extent that they're even real problems. And again, as I said, I'm not sure that many of them are. So I thought that that was interesting. I don't think that I've looked at kind of our filmic hero culture that way before. Pausing for just a second. Crystal Anon gifted 5 subscriptions. Thank you very much, Crystal Anon. And Doomchick says, if you have memberships on YouTube, do you get that income? Yes, I would get that income, but I have not started memberships on YouTube. And maybe I can do it as like, just if you want to support the show, you can do it here. But truth be told, I would rather have people do that on Substack. And if I am not doing shows and I'm only writing for periods of time, at least on Substack, you'll have access to that writing. Whereas in a YouTube membership, you won't have access to any of that. So I would suggest against that. I mean, do whatever you want, but I would suggest against that. And truthfully, as I said, I haven't turned them on because I don't want to do particular things for people, like give them special experiences. And that's what those memberships are often for. That stuff kind of makes me feel a little creepy and like I'm whoring myself out or something. You know what I mean? I'll do this for money. It just, I don't know. It seems weird, but you know, maybe in the future, I've considered before whether it makes sense to do direct, like one-on-one consulting about these kinds of subjects and some of the critical thinking stuff. If there's interest in those kind of things in the future, maybe I'll explore that. But otherwise, the membership thing, I don't know if I'll turn it on. I probably won't. There are better ways to support the show. I would encourage people to support on Substack, or there are links in the show description, the show notes each time. You know, there's the Ko-Fi link where you can donate money directly. There's a Bitcoin wallet there, however people want to do it. Nobody is required to donate to the show or support it financially. Although, as I potentially move away from doing the show quite as often over these next few months to focus on writing that I do that is not related to the book is going to go there on Substack. And I may put it behind a paywall or partially behind a paywall. I don't know. We're just going to have to see how it goes. So sorry to have diverted onto 2 topics for the first 20 minutes of this show that aren't really show oriented, but well, I guess the Mission Impossible thing was on the right track. Steve Claybaugh, $10 Rumble Rant says, my wife and I met with the Pittsburgh girls the other day. We discussed future meet in Gettysburg this fall, to be determined on Telegram. Thank you, Chris. Your research is very appreciated. Thank you, Steve. Cool. I don't know what you mean by the Pittsburgh girls. I did see that there might have been a Badlands meetup, and maybe that's what you're talking about. So if that's what you're talking about, very cool. And also that's quite a trek you made. So good on you. I think that's got to be what? 6 hours, 7 hours from Gettysburg. Maybe I'm overestimating, but I think that that's a substantial drive. Okay. So let's get into some of the stuff that I wanted to talk about today. And I guess I'll lead it off right here. And thanks to Starborn out there for always dropping links in my chat. Some of them prove quite helpful in terms of putting this show together on a regular basis. And then sometimes she drops ones that I have to talk about just not too long before I go live. So I was able to scan through this, and it's directly linked to another topic that I want to discuss today, and another article, by the way, that Starborn hit me with this morning in the New York Times. But first, I want to go to Zero Hedge, because we talk about Peter Thiel quite often, and he's a very important figure. People understand that he was an investor in Facebook. He was one of the PayPal mafia. He started Palantir, which we're going to talk about in a second. And he is the quote unquote mentor of JD Vance. Might be a good guy. He might not be a good guy. We talked about him a couple of weeks ago in his discussion with Jordan Peterson. It's hard to know exactly what to make of that. I'm not familiar with the topics discussed or the lectures discussed in this article, but I would like to see them. If someone is able to find them, I'll be more than happy to watch them. I would be very, very interested to hear Peter Thiel's discussions of these subjects. But, Peter Thiel did the foreword to the most recent edition of The Sovereign Individual. And I have some idea of his beliefs about the future from that. He's also a guy that pays a lot of attention to Curtis Yarvin, who I pay attention to. So I have some familiarity with his ideas along those lines. And I have expressed on this podcast a number of times that I really do not believe that Peter Thiel's ultimate interests are aligned with the interests of MAGA. It's not that they're fully incompatible. It's just that I think he's going a different direction, and that direction may not be where we want to go. And so when you see that, you have to really balance out the relationship there. How much power do we give to a person who is very helpful in our project, but nonetheless pursuing a different project on his own? That's an important question. And it's a question that we need to be asking, not only when it comes to people with oligarchic power whose companies are intimately linked to the intelligence community, to In-Q-Tel from back then, and to the Defense Department, as we'll see in a little bit. We also have to ask that about, just people in our normal life, totally separate from politics or quote unquote, the awakening or futurism or anything like that, technology, etc. We have to ask, this person is clearly helpful in the things I am pursuing in the world right now. How much power do I give this person, this relationship, this collaboration, this partnership, however it is, however it's laid out? Or do I understand that because we are going in different directions and we actually have deep moral differences about the directions we're going that lead us in these different directions, do I have an immediate responsibility to eliminate this influence until I am certain that our directions are aligned? And I imagine that that is the sort of issue that is a pressing concern at the top levels of whatever you believe the infrastructure around Trump might be, right? Do we use people for a time because our interests are aligned? And then once we have done that, is there a way to extract ourselves from that situation, going off in the proper direction, having not given the other party the power necessary or the insight or access necessary to steer us off our ultimate course? And so that's a question of basic Christianity, but it's also a question of how things are being operated at the top level in a situation like this. People talk about Israel for last and stuff like that. There's a crowd of people who seems to be diminishing and getting laughed out of the room at this point, who believe that Trump is some Zionist servant who's doing the bidding of Israel. That doesn't make any sense. But that doesn't mean that because he's not, he should therefore shun everything to do with Israel. Whether you love Israel or you hate Israel, you should understand that Israel is a relevant force in the world with significant power behind it that must be dealt with and cannot be ignored. Okay, which means you can't just go fully against in one moment. So perhaps you pursue a common cause for a duration, and if they do not come into alignment with your cause, then you have to separate at some point. And you would not do that right away. You would separate later when it becomes absolutely apparent that you're not on the same course and that the separation is a necessity. Or you do it according to a plan, understanding that there was never going to be a long-term or full-term partnership, that you would eventually separate, and then you do it. So with that in mind, you can look at various bodies, various entities, various people. The Republican Party. Is the Republican Party an organization with MAGA aligned interests for a time that eventually must be let go? Or does the Republican Party shift in alignment to be fully aligned with MAGA, to be fully taken over by MAGA so that every instrument of the Republican Party is pursuing that same cause? Those are two totally divergent options. The same is true for someone like Elon Musk or like JD Vance or like Peter Thiel or like any of the companies that, like Defense Department companies or whatever else, that the Trump administration might be engaged with out there in the world. So are aligned interests indicative of long-term interests? And if they're not, how long is it justifiable to remain pursuing common interests together, knowing that the interest of the other party might be antithetical to your interest, okay? Or incompatible even if it's not a polar opposite, incompatible with your interests, okay? If Peter Thiel and his ilk, all of these tech oligarchs who came onto the side of Donald Trump after supporting everyone else first, from Joe Biden to Ron DeSantis and other candidates in a fake Republican primary, all of a sudden they're with Donald Trump. And now our interests are aligned because their interests are aligned with our interests because they think that Trump is a better vehicle for them. Okay. But their interests don't change while their actions are aligned, while their motivations are aligned. Their interests don't change at all. And so at some point, perhaps there's a separation. If they're going into the technocratic dystopia that people might imagine, and they may well be, that may be their thing. They might just want flying cars. And if 90% of the human population ends up behind goggles in a 12 by 12 box room, watching streaming content all day and having food delivered to their doorstep, never leaving that little box, but existing always in a different world. We're very close to the Matrix-like situation there. And that's not what MAGA wants. So at some point, there has to be a divergence. So you got to wonder if that is coming for Peter Thiel. Are people like Peter Thiel being saved for last? Or are their interests actually aligned and we are then incorrect about the other part? We're just not fully getting how on board a person like Peter Thiel would then be because we don't have insight into the long-term project. And from the perspective of the American people, that's a real problem. At least if we're to have government of, by, and for the people, then we should actually know what the long-term plan is from the leader that we have chosen, okay? We're not able to get insight on all of that right now. It's broad strokes and then a lot of specifics getting figured out along the way. Is that okay? It's all right for that to be okay. If that's the best we can do, then we shouldn't just stomp our feet and give up, but it's certainly not the ideal and we should be striving for ideals. So let's get into this article a little bit. I hope that all made sense. Pardon for just 1 second. I'm trying to. All right. Let's just continue on here. So let's go to Zero Hedge now. This is from yesterday, the 29th. Peter Thiel's Visions of Apocalypse. Is AI the Antichrist? Peter Thiel is a big thinker, and these days he's been thinking about doomsday. And by the way, this is by a man named Jacob Howland, and it's republished on Zero Hedge, but first appeared on unheard.com. But back to the article. In a series of 4 lectures he's given 3 times at Oxford, Harvard, and the University of Austin, he's tried to understand human history and particularly modernity within the framework of biblical prophecies of the end of days. Thiel believes that the Antichrist, whose identity is uncertain, is it a person, a system, a global tyranny, is not just a medieval fantasy. His free-ranging lectures, moving rapidly between disparate texts, Gulliver's Travels, Alan Moore's graphic novel, Watchmen, and topics, sacred violence, high-velocity global financial systems defy easy summary. But their leading themes include the Antichrist's relationship to Armageddon and the roles of technology and empire in the Antichrist's rise. It's an ambitious, thought-provoking attempt to weave from seemingly unrelated strands of meaning a theological / anthropological / historical narrative that aims to make sense of the whole of human experience. Some will find Thiel's project very odd. How can an enormously successful, mathematically gifted, philosophically educated tech entrepreneur seriously entertain Bible-thumping myths from the apocalypse of John? Well, that is something that people definitely do find odd, and that's something that I would have probably found odd 6 or 7 or 8 years ago, maybe longer. I don't remember when I stopped thinking stuff like this was stupid. But yeah, now I think that that's the only smart way to approach these things, and that the quote unquote science, I was going to call it scientific, but it's not even scientific. So the quote unquote isn't actually enough to convey how anti-scientific the scientific process is, in terms of the scientific process being the method by which they deliver us the new science they have decided upon. Anyhow, I don't know if I just said that terribly, but hopefully you get my point. All right. So the writer goes on to say, here's a better question. How could he and we not take them seriously? As Dorian Linsky writes in his book, Everything Must Go, The Stories We Tell About the End of the World, apocalyptic angst has become a constant, all flow and no ebb. Contemporary culture has long been saturated with post-apocalyptic, I cannot talk today. Post-apocalyptic novels, comic books, films, TV series, and video games. He goes on, but I'm going to try to skip through this and just hit the parts that are necessary. We'll see how well that works. Thiel is driven to find a way between the binary alternative of no world or one world, the whirlpool of planetary destruction, or the many-headed monster of global totalitarianism. So, if nothing else, Peter Thiel is at least attuned to that concern, because I believe that is a real concern. And as far as global totalitarianism goes, his political outlook seems to suggest that he opposes global totalitarianism, but maybe not perhaps localized totalitarianism with the allowance for a number of options all around the world. And that's also suggested by Curtis Yarvin's patchwork, that there can be any form of government in these small and isolated situations that people would then have the ability to opt out of. I don't know how the ability to opt out of a totalitarian system is guaranteed in any respect. Anyhow, let's continue on. Thiel's insight is that, unlike most contemporary imaginings of global catastrophe, the Bible's prophecies do more than pluck our inner strings of existential dread. They help us to understand our chaotic times. Matthew 24:24 predicts that there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and they shall deceive the very elect. In other words, the Antichrist will attempt to appear more Christian than Christ himself, even as it works to accomplish the wholesale destruction of the Christian underpinnings of Western civilization. And I would suggest that that is one way to imagine the Antichrist, and I don't think that that is the only way to imagine it, but that's certainly very much in line of what we discussed the other day with a super powerful AI being built as the God of the false reality, that it is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. It knows everything, it is everywhere, and it is all powerful and can do anything. And I suggested that perhaps AI has been directing far more of our existence in the real world than we believe that it has. And that's assuming, again, that our real world is physically as we have always understood it, and not, for instance, just all existing in simulation, in an information and energy matrix, for lack of a better term. And that's all there is. Could God do that if God wanted? I would suggest, yes, God could do that. And I've said many times before that the famous Einstein quote, God does not play dice. I've adapted that and said, God does not play dice, but he might play SimCity. And if this existence is just one in many iterations of God attempting to perfect his creation, then a lot of possibilities are opened along those lines. And I, for one, don't dismiss those. Although I know that a lot of Christians really bump up against that pretty hard. I'm not exactly sure why, because it doesn't preclude God and it doesn't preclude Jesus. So I don't know why that's such a problem. If someone wants to tell me in the chat, I'd be more than happy to read your explanation and consider it. But let's skip down. A more successful antichrist would, like the French revolutionaries and the Marxists, promote values that seem more consistent with the quote unquote Judeo-Christian foundations of civilization, such as universal liberty, equality, and justice. Okay. Well, again, I would not suggest that Judeo-Christian values are the same as Christian values, nor that they are the foundation of civilization broadly. But we don't have to get hung up on that. While the past displays a seemingly endless cycle of civilizational rises and falls, Thiel believes that modern science and technology have turned history into a linear progression, as the Bible teaches, with a beginning and a final irreversible end. From its inception, technology, a political project, as much as one of engineering, has dangled before us the shimmering promise of godhood, with which the serpent tempted Eve to eat the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge. Francis Bacon and René Descartes, the project's 16th and 17th century founders, rightly understood it to be an anti-Christian endeavor that needed to be cloaked with a veil of religious orthodoxy. Very interesting, all on its own. In terms of the Bible teaching a beginning and a final irreversible end, again, I would suggest that that's something that is up for discussion and debate still. And I'm rather sure that certain people who will listen to this podcast eventually, if not if not listening right now, would disagree with that interpretation in terms of the end times. This seems to suggest the kind of the idea that the end times, as described in Matthew and in Revelation, have not come yet. I don't think that that's the only interpretation out there. Anyway, I'm not the scholar to make that case. Okay, let's skip down. An early modern conceit that has in many respects become a late modern curse, technology underlies virtually every apocalyptic anxiety of our time. But Thiel is unsure of the role of advanced technology and in particular AI. In the big picture of history he's trying to work out, is it the Antichrist? Does it prepare the way for the Antichrist? Or is it a catachon or catacon? Not familiar with that term. The mysterious force mentioned at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 6, that forestalls the Antichrist. The Greek word katakane means to hold down. I don't know what to make of that. The catacon plays a major part in Thiel's analysis because things capable of opposing the Antichrist can also advance its aims and vice versa. In the absence of the existential threat of communism, for example, Western countries like the US and the UK, aided by advanced digital technology, have turned psychological operations and disinformation tactics developed to fight foreign adversaries against their own citizens. This suggests deep cultural sickness, a crisis of confidence in the values that defeated totalitarianism in the 20th century. And I would suggest that that is indeed well stated and a very important concern. To break for a second, the idea that the antichrist can be advancing our aims, while our aims and our actions could also be advancing the antichrist, is totally in line with what we were just talking about. And it's actually at the heart of a really interesting interpretation of the Matrix films that I was reading yesterday. Thank you, Orel, for the recommendation there and for those links. One of the interesting topics, a lot of people regarding the Matrix, a lot of people have seen the first one and maybe seen it many times and have largely disregarded the sequels. Some people haven't watched them at all. Some people watched them a long time ago and didn't like them and never watched them again. And then there was a sequel in 2021 that I think relatively few people watched, and the people who did watch it had the same reaction. They didn't like it. It had all these problems, like some diversity and woke seeming stuff. I got a lot more out of it than that, but I get why people haven't gone back to the sequels so much. So if you ignore the sequels, then the totality of the Matrix exists only in the first film. And what we understand about the Matrix in the first film really only gets to the point where humans are trapped in these tiny cages, experiencing a totally falsified reality in a digital space while their bodies are being used for their energy. Okay. And maybe even for the perfection of the algorithm within the Matrix, the algorithm that governs everything, because they are responding to it all at all times. And their responses, as read by the machines, are actions that indicate their desires, their happiness with the Matrix, and their likelihood to wake up out of the Matrix. Okay. So all that makes total sense in the first one. If you just think about, there's this human reality, and then there's this Matrix reality. And if one day we get captured by this thing and plugged into this Matrix reality, the whole world will be only that way as we've known it. But there's still some reality outside of that. Okay. And maybe there has to be, maybe there doesn't. Depends on how you want to think of it. It starts getting pretty philosophically and I guess technologically complicated at that point. But the key idea in this guy's framing, as far as I made it, which is about, I think, halfway through, it puts in opposition the architect character within the Matrix and the Oracle character within the Matrix, and suggests that they have this relationship where they seem to be pursuing different goals, but their goals together are the advancement and the continuation of the Matrix project at large. When enough people get upset about what they're experiencing in the Matrix and want to leave it, the one appears to be the person to lead them out of the Matrix. But then, as the architect explains, out of the Matrix is just time to reboot the Matrix. They're never actually going to fully realize a community outside of the Matrix that can ever actually threaten the Matrix. Okay. It's only another option, and that other option preserves the reality of the Matrix. And that's embodied in a character like Cypher, who eats the steak and decides to rejoin the machines. So we have the positive and negative forces that seem to be in opposition, still just working inextricably, maybe together, for the continuity of the purpose, for the thing to continue moving forward. And maybe that's how we need to think of these things. I don't know. I'm just checking the chat quickly to see if I don't think anybody's losing their minds so far. Okay, I think we're good. I don't want to ever get too deep into these topics because I'm not, as I say, the expert. And Boom Diggity over on YouTube, $100 super chat. Boom Diggity here, pumping up the love on CommieTube. Thanks, Chris, for all your work. Well, thank you, Boom Diggity, and thank you for your consistent support of the larger Badlands project. Don't know what we'd do without you. Thank you very much. Okay, but let's get back to this. As I was saying, I'm certainly not the expert on the religious topics, but you can't avoid them at this point. This is where we are, right? At some point, we got to think about these problems. And thinking about these problems, I think, is more important than watching Fox News updates about when the arrests are coming. Just me. Let's go back to the article in Zero Hedge. Thiel nevertheless thinks that worries about AI taking over the world are more dangerous than AI itself. So he and I might be aligned on that. Because the fear of existential threats plays directly into the cold hands of deracinated elites who are working to establish a global managerial state. Even so, there is something very satanic about AI, a ghostly entity that is increasingly capable of hacking human minds on a very large scale. What Thiel said of Bacon seems to apply to the developers of large language models. They've summoned a demon they don't believe exists. He says, the article says, the Antichrist is by definition negative and dependent. It rejects Christ and Christian values while offering a spurious imitation of them. AI is a similarly dependent being. It is a simulacrum of human intelligence and language, capacities of thought and speech the Greeks called logos. But AI lacks essential elements of human logos. Its embeddedness in the world through birth in a body bound for death, and the mortal and intellectual interiority that make the human being an image of God. Speech is a living voice that springs from the soul to give interiority its biblical name, embedded in a body of an existing individual. But AI is not a living being, and it replaces inner plenitude with mechanical, algorithmic emptiness. Embeddedness in space and time expresses itself as a concern for and responsiveness to the actual conditions of existence, the biblical paradigm of which is Adam's naming of the animals who live alongside him in Eden. But while AI requires material substrates, servers, and other hardware, it inhabits them in purely occasional and contingent ways, like the demons that beg Christ to pass from the mad Galilean to the herd of pigs. Its relationship with actuality is equally contingent. It exists in a digital cloud of pure possibility where it arranges information according to no criterion of truth besides probability and the rules of logic. That's why ChatGPT and other LLMs are so prone to hallucinations, like citing books that exist only in Borges's fictional, virtually infinite library of Babel. And so the conversation goes on. I just want to skip down again toward the end. Peak AI ministering to the inner emptiness and boredom of atomized, directionless selves will peak human debility and enslavement, will mean peak human debility and enslavement. Aren't these the goals of the Antichrist, which, whatever form it may take, always seeks to remake human beings in its own image? And I think that that is an important concern, especially because our peers and maybe ourselves at times experience, and I mean by our peers, our fellow humans out there in the world, people who exist in the exact same society that we do. Are they experiencing inner emptiness en masse? I would suggest yes. Bored of atomization and lack of direction? I would suggest yes. And there are even very good and even faithful people who are experiencing this because the world is so strange, partly due to our technology. Back to the article. But not so fast. Perhaps AI is really a catacon. That is the argument of Alex Karp and Nicholas Zamiska in The Technological Republic, Hard Power, Soft Belief, and the Future of the West. Karp, a classmate of Thiel's at Stanford, who also studied philosophy and with Thiel founded Palantir Technologies, and Zimiska, his longtime deputy, insist that the enemies of the West will prevail unless software developers work in close collaboration with the American government to produce AI-powered military capabilities superior to that of our adversaries, as Palantir has done using LLMs. That is very interesting. The enemies of the West will prevail unless software developers work in close collaboration with the American government to produce AI-powered military capabilities superior to that of our adversaries, as Palantir has done. The question would then become, who are the enemies of the West? Under the good twin, evil twin paradigm, the enemies of the West is a nonsensical phrase. We are generally to take that to mean the Russians, the Chinese, the Middle East. These are the enemies of the West, we are told. But are they actually the enemies of the West? And then what is the West? And that's a different discussion that we don't need to embrace. But under good twin, evil twin, you only have the top-down, centralized, and centralizing control system, or sovereign individuals led by sovereign leaders of sovereign nations, the decentralized model. Okay, there's only those two models. And factions supporting either model exist absolutely everywhere and at different ratios. I would suggest that perhaps the Russian ratio right now of good twin to evil twin factions in the country is higher than ours is. So is it then possible that Russia is an enemy of the West? And if Russia is not the enemy of quote unquote, the West, which we identify ourselves with for no reason. We're Americans. We're not the West. We're Americans, and we can preserve American culture. We can do that. But in the good twin, evil twin paradigm related to this, it would not then make any sense to ascribe Russia enemy status regarding us if their ratio of good twin to evil twin is higher than ours is. We are actually more of an enemy to them than they are to us. So I don't know exactly what he means here. And if the West is actually Karp and Thiel's identity or identification of the regime, for instance, because the regime does encompass the West and has always encompassed the West, then why would we want them leading the charge to build this sort of weaponry and military capability? They may well be working on behalf of that regime and saying it's to protect the West, but to protect the West, what's the West? Against what? That's the real question. They acknowledge that this will require a massive cultural shift among our technological and cosmopolitan elites, who've embraced an ethereal, post-national, and disembodied morality that scorns patriotism, and who've learned that, quote, belief itself in anything other than oneself, perhaps, is dangerous and to be avoided. That may well be true. There are certainly technological and cosmopolitan elites who've embraced those concepts. There are also plenty of people who are not elites or even wannabe elites who have similarly embraced those concepts. Yet it is the market's deployment of advanced technology, including AI, that has above all promoted this, quote unquote, hollowing out of the American mind, the title of the book's second part. Not least by rapidly dissolving social bonds, encouraging pathological self-absorption, and making possible, even incentivizing, digital swarms of doxing and online cancellation. Considered in the context of Karp's and Zimiska's urgent call to arms, the revelation of this contradiction is genuinely apocalyptic. Whether it will accelerate or slow the advent of the antichrist and the bang or whimper of the world's end depends on our individual and collective capacities to make informed decisions that call for moral courage, capacities that have been eroded by technologically induced oblivion, historical, moral, and metaphysical forgetfulness, and our ingrained habit of ceding direction over our interior lives, the development of our moral selves, to the market. Contemplating our predicament, it is hard not to feel discouraged. Well, it's not that hard. Hope alone remains in the Pandora's box of our clever man gods, the Pandora's box our clever man gods have constructed. No, it does not. Hope, without which the understanding, at least for those whose prayers deliver no consolation, would be plagued by the perplexity and fear that have flown therefrom. It's time to take it out of the box and hold it close to our hearts and minds, where it might inspire new growths of wisdom. Now, that is a very, tech curious, tech uncertain article. That person does seem, I would guess that writer is godless, although I'm not obviously entirely sure and would not want to ascribe that to someone. But our only hope does not come in the form of technology that can defeat our enemy's technology, while we identify ourselves as the West and our enemy as that thing that wants to make the antichrist. Because it seems like if there is a body of individuals, an organization that is simultaneously interested in the antichrist and is anti-human and doesn't care about the future of humanity, that would seem to be the very regime that we believe the MAGA project is fighting against, and that the project worldwide is fighting against. They seem to be the ones most motivated to create that, and the ones trying to create a false god of the material realm, because they don't have a god. So to help them for a time in that project might not be the right answer. Okay. It might just be eschewing that project altogether and pursuing a different project. Now, if that's what we're doing, all good. And if it's being done on our behalf, on the people's behalf, not on behalf of the regimes, the West, that we are meant to identify with, that's really the crux of this issue, as far as I'm concerned. And it is a very interesting and very important issue. All right. LeVar in the Substack chat said, I always lose my mind listening to you, Chris, in a good way. LOL. Well, I hope you don't lose it for very long, is all I'm saying. People are, okay, it seems like people are on board with this. All right, okay. Just wanted to make sure nobody was like, this is all crazy. Maybe it is. I don't know. Let us continue with Palantir for a moment. And this article I had more time with, and I hope that means that my highlights have saved, although one highlight, of course, did not. And so now I have to, it tells me how many highlights did not save each time. So now I have to scan the rest of the article. What is that other thing that I had highlighted? So continuing with Palantir. This is the New York Times. Trump taps Palantir to compile data on Americans. So the problem becomes even more important. This is from today. In March, President Trump signed an executive order calling for the federal government to share data across agencies, raising questions over whether he might compile a master list of personal information on Americans that could give him untold surveillance power. That does sound like a concerning issue. Except until you remember that the regime already has unrestrained and untold surveillance power. Mr. Trump has not publicly talked about the effort, but behind the scenes, officials have quietly put technological building blocks into place to enable his plan. In particular, they have turned to one company, Palantir, the data analysis and technology firm. The Trump administration has expanded Palantir's work across the federal government in recent months. The company has received more than $113 million in federal government spending since Mr. Trump took office, according to public records, including additional funds from existing contracts, as well as new contracts with DHS and the Pentagon. This does not include a $795 million contract that the Department of Defense awarded the company last week, which has not been spent. So right there, we're talking about not quite, but close to $1 trillion. I mean, it's around $1 billion, around $900 million. So I guess that's not totally out of the ordinary for the Defense Department, et cetera. The push has put a key Palantir product called Foundry into at least 4 federal agencies, including DHS and the Health and Human Services Department. And I am skipping around in this article. Widely adopting Foundry, which organizes and analyzes data, paves the way for Mr. Trump to easily merge information from different agencies, the government officials said. Creating detailed portraits of Americans based on government data is not just a pipe dream. The Trump administration has already sought access to hundreds of data points on citizens and others through government databases, including their bank account numbers, the amount of their student debt, their medical claims, and any disability status. Mr. Trump could potentially use such information to advance his political agenda by policing immigrants and punishing critics. Democrat lawmakers and critics have said. Privacy advocates, student unions, and labor organizations have filed lawsuits to block data access, questioning whether the government could weaponize people's personal information. Okay. All of that sounds like totally legitimate concerns, but these totally legitimate concerns are coming from Democrat lawmakers, Trump admin critics, student unions, and labor rights organizations, in addition to privacy advocates. So those are all very leftist sort of groups. So we have to think, hey, man, maybe there's something wrong with that. And maybe there is. And I think that what's wrong with it is that they have always had the ability to do this. The regime side of things has always had these abilities, working with these same corporations, getting any information they want, and probably with access to that great cloud in the sky where all of everybody's data exists and is analyzed. Does the military have access to that? Do the intelligence agencies have access to that? I would suggest yes to the military and probably to one or more intelligence agencies. And maybe even a better way to look at it is, did they have that access prior to this period, prior to this happening? I would suggest absolutely they had all the access to all of our data. And that companies like Google, who track us in all sorts of ways, companies like Meta, who track us in all sorts of ways, X.com, formerly Twitter, all these companies track us. Any mapping program, any dating app, anything that requires your location settings to be turned on while you're moving around, that means they have all the information on where you are. They know what you're spending every time you're using an app at a grocery store or a Starbucks or whatever else. They know you're there. They know all of these things about us, and they've had access to them the entire time. Is it possible that the Trump administration is trying to build up that same access or strip that access from them in some way and put it in a centralized place that can maybe be fragmented and decentralized? This information is already out there, and it's already being used to control our behavior, to control our consumer spending, to control what we say online. All this stuff is already happening, and it's all automated based on algorithms. All our data is already there. So the privacy advocates, these left-wing organizations that I just described, are upset about a problem that is already affecting all of us. Okay. And we can all be upset about the problem. It's right to potentially be upset about that problem. But they're only getting upset about it now because Trump is in charge. And if Trump wasn't in charge, they might still be advocating against these government databases. But I don't know. I guess that maybe we give them the benefit of the doubt on that one, that they just really are privacy advocates. Though I don't know how you get to the situation where we have all of this stuff in the world if privacy advocates were either A, doing anything, or B, cared at all in the first place. And I don't know what the level of caring must have been, but it must have been pretty low if we reached this point. And many of us weren't aware of these problems, or we just avoided or ignored them, or figured, well, that's the way it is now. I guess we're all subject to this same thing. I don't know that we are, but let us continue. Palantir's selection as a chief vendor for the project was driven by Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. According to the government officials, at least 3 Doge members formerly worked at Palantir, while 2 others had worked at companies funded by Peter Thiel, an investor and founder of Palantir. That's quite interesting. So Elon wants to bring in, this is what we're being told, right? We don't know what the reality is. Elon wants to bring in Palantir. Certain Doge employees are from Palantir. Certain Doge employees worked for Peter Thiel. That sounds like a pretty substantial project. Was that project planned in advance? Yes, of course it was. Was that project already executed in advance? Well, yeah, it might have been. Maybe we're just finding out about what the influence of Palantir is on a delayed timeline. That is entirely possible. We should not suspect that we are getting any of this information ever on the actual timeline. So Elon has this relationship. They've had a relationship for 2 decades or more, of course. PayPal and Silicon Valley Tech, obviously. Maybe Elon is a good guy and actually Trump's good friend and is bringing Peter Thiel in to help, or he's being the narrative delivery system for this Peter Thiel, this quasi Peter Thiel effort, because Thiel's not technically at Palantir anymore right now, just like Bill Gates isn't technically at Microsoft anymore. But Alex Karp is there, and Alex Karp donated, I think it says in this article, to Joe Biden. So all of our information is going to be dominated by these people. Are these the sorts of people who we trust with our information, who we would want dominating our information? Because at some point we have to really get down to these questions, because a lot does ride on how these things will go in the framing we just described. And I don't think that we are doing a good enough job of making sure that aligned interests aren't confused for being on the same path, right? We talked about this back during the Ron DeSantis op. Hopefully the way I described it earlier is understandable. It's possible that they may be the same thing. It's also possible that they might be opposite things advancing together, and that there is a real cost to empowering that opposite thing that may potentially, or even right now, be greater than the benefit we are receiving for the alignment. Okay. And I think it's important that we recognize these dynamics, and the way ultimately to determine these things. I mean, everybody can determine them for themselves, obviously, but I pass everything through the same filter every time intentionally. Is that thing worldly? Is it moral? Right? Those are often 2 totally divergent directions. If something is worldly and we can make a case for it being good in the world, okay, well, that's good. It's better than it being bad. Oh, wait, it can also be bad too. Okay, well, is it moral? Is the foundational principle of what that's doing actually moral? And if we determine that, wait a second, no, it's not moral, well, then we have to look back at the worldly thing and say, you are suspect at best, because you are now asking for our permission and consent to do something in the world that doesn't seem moral, because you're suggesting that it's going to have a good outcome. Now we're talking about a consequentialist morality of the kind we discussed the other day, Sam Harris's Moral Landscape. Okay. You can read many texts on utilitarianism if you want to understand more about that. But we're immediately into the consequentialist realm, which is already kind of outside the bounds of the truly moral. And so when we're making these practical arguments on why doing XYZ is good, even though it's not good, we should be really, really careful about that stuff. And our interests, generally speaking, being aligned with that side of things is probably not a justification to override the moral concerns, in my estimation. Let's get back to the article. Just a couple more bits here. Palantir declined to comment on its work with the Trump administration and pointed to its blog, which details how the company handles data. We act as a data processor, not a data controller, it said. That's a very important distinction. Is it true? We don't know, but it's a very important distinction. Our software and services are used under direction from the organizations that license our products. These organizations define what can and cannot be done with their data. They control the Palantir accounts in which analysis is conducted. Now, the question becomes, is it actually possible to prevent Palantir from seeking in a clandestine way a way to control that data that they are meant to just be processing? And do we have full transparency to know that? Is it possible to know that? Is it possible to make sure that can't happen, that they can't control our data when they are only supposed to be processing? I'm guessing that their control mechanisms on the client side probably can't dictate that in a way that could be fully trusted. Maybe that's just the world we're in. They're giving a proper answer, if that's the true answer, but it's awfully hard to just trust that on, Palantir's word. The White House did not comment on the use of Palantir's technology and referred to Mr. Trump's executive order, which said he wanted to, quote, eliminate information silos and streamline data collection across all agencies to increase government efficiency and save hard-earned taxpayer dollars. Perhaps, okay? Should we believe that the government agencies don't share all the information they have on the American people, not only with one another in a centralized form for the government, for intel, for the military to monitor and use, but their corporate partners as well? I would suggest that they already have all that, and that the idea that data is somehow kept separate in really important ways that defeat the possibility of it being used together to exploit us, that does not seem like a plausible interpretation based on what we have seen from the government over these past few years. Just want to hit, I think, maybe one more thing or two more things. At the IRS, Palantir engineers joined in April to use Foundry to organize data gathered on American taxpayers, two government officials said. Their work began as a way to create a single searchable database for the IRS, but has since expanded, they said. Palantir is in talks for a permanent contract with the IRS, they said. Now, we certainly hope that the IRS won't be around. We expect that it won't be around. Trump has alluded to that numerous times. This is where it gets interesting, though, in regard to what we were just talking about. If it's the case that certain federal agencies are able to keep their data separate from the rest of the government's data, and that was the kind of status quo ante before Trump, what would that mean? Which agencies would be most likely to have that? I would suggest it would be agencies like the IRS and the Fed, who are essentially quasi-governmental organizations under the global regime that exist kind of above the uniparty, if not parallel to it, but are not organizations with full oversight from our government, though they may be now. So if organizations like that had their data cordoned off and now are having it brought into the big picture analysis of what's going on, that's the sort of thing that could trigger this sort of discontent. I was going to say freak out, but maybe it hasn't advanced that far yet. I mean, there was considerable freak out for the whole Doge thing. all that's totally possible. Got to leave those scenarios open. The IRS one would be extremely interesting because being that they are just the collection arm of the Federal Reserve, perhaps they would want to keep their information separate from everyone else's information, and they would not want their information to be seen by an anti-regime actor like Donald Trump and his administration, to the best of our ability to discern. All right, let us move on from there. We are going to go to one of the most interesting things, I think. I don't think it's overboard for me to say this. One of the most interesting things I've read in quite a while. So, Dominic Cummings is a British man. And I think they actually, I meant to look this up this morning. I think they actually made a movie about Dominic Cummings, where he was played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Let me see if that's correct. Maybe it was just an HBO thing. The machine will tell me, though, I have no doubt. It's, yes, it's HBO. Benedict Cumberbatch portrayed Dominic Cummings in the 2019 political drama film Brexit, The Uncivil War. Okay, so Cummings is, he was the campaign director of the Vote Leave campaign, so critical in the Brexit movement, and has been a key figure and commentator on British politics ever since. He has a Substack, and it seems to be a quite interesting Substack. I noticed over the last couple of days that Dominic Cummings used back in 2021 and 2022 phrases like narrative whiplash and was talking about political kayfabe. So it's possible that those words may have kind of filtered into our general milieu from Dominic Cummings using them prior. Thought that was very interesting. Anyhow, this is the article that I was reading yesterday. This is from Wednesday, actually. So Dominic Cummings, Dominic with just a C at the end, and then Cummings, CUMMINGS.substack.com. People, Ideas, Machines, 12. Theories of Regime Change and Civil War. All right. So he begins with a number of really interesting quotes, and I don't think I'm going to read all of them. Where am I going here? Let's start with this one from Thucydides. At such a time, the life of the city was all in disorder, and human nature, which is always ready to transgress the laws, having now trampled them underfoot, delighted to show that her passions were ungovernable, that she was stronger than justice, and the enemy of everything above her. If malignity had not exercised a fatal power, how could anyone have preferred revenge to piety and gain to innocence? But when men are retaliating upon others, they are reckless of the future and do not hesitate to annul those common laws of humanity to which every individual trusts for his own hope of deliverance should he ever be overtaken by calamity. They forget that in their own hour of need, they will look for them in vain. Thought that was very interesting. There's a Nietzsche quote here. The democratization of Europe is at the same time an involuntary argument for the breeding of tyrants. And Nietzsche got to actually observe that. I want to be sure I'm not passing up this Bismarck quote to my own detriment. Okay. This is the one that I cared about the most. So this is Tocqueville. It is not always when things are going from bad to worse that revolutions break out. On the contrary, It oftener happens that when a people which has put up with an oppressive rule over a long period without protest suddenly finds the government relaxing its pressure, it takes up arms against it. Thus, the social order overthrown by a revolution is almost always better than the one immediately preceding it. And experience teaches us that, generally speaking, the most perilous moment for a bad government is one when it seeks to mend its ways. All right? We are in a period like that right now. That is really critical. The most perilous moment for a bad government is one when it seeks to mend its ways. Now, you could say that Donald Trump, under his administration, the government is seeking to mend its ways. And in many respects, that's true. And I mentioned many of those respects, and I consistently say that's bad. The solution to our government is not a more efficient version of this government. Okay. Our fix is not going to come from inside the system. We're not just trying to correct the flaws of this system, which doesn't mean we have to tear everything down. It means that this government is evil. It is so corrupted and infiltrated, so utterly inverted that it is now the evil we were attempting to avoid. It is the tool of the evil we were attempting to avoid. So you can't just try to fix that. You can't just mend the government's ways when it has reached that point. And it's critical that we don't focus on doing that. But the point made here in the quote is that things get very perilous for the government when it seeks to mend its ways because it has kind of stepped back a little bit. It describes it as relaxing the government's pressure. And once it indicates that level of weakness, well, then people have more of a desire to strike it. And then the question will become, and we're going to probably readdress this in a second, how does the government then respond? And does it respond in a way that now its oppression is justified because of those rising up against it, and they are able to force those forces to submit and then bring in an even more totalitarian rule? That is the regime playbook. The regime playbook, of course, includes revolution. The color revolution, the fake revolution, the revolution brought up by media and lawfare and influence and manipulation and corruption, that's part of their playbook. So certainly they understand the response to that to be actual revolution from the people. And the hope then is to mitigate that within the bounds of what remains relatively okay for the regime. But let's continue. Only consummate statecraft can enable a king to save his throne after a long spell of oppressive rule he sets to improving the lot of his subjects. When after a long spell, I hope I said that correctly, patiently endured so long as it seemed beyond redress, a grievance comes to appear intolerable once the possibility of removing it crosses men's minds. For the mere fact that certain abuses have been remedied draws attention to the others, and they now appear more galling. People may suffer less, but their sensibility is exacerbated. And again, that's something that we can absolutely see playing out right now. If we didn't notice the first problems we noticed, we would not have noticed the rest of the problems, right? And if we didn't see that there was a force, namely Trump, there who was inclined to fix those problems, then we wouldn't expect all those problems to be fixed. And so now we're in a situation where we have both of those things. We have had the awareness of some, which granted us the awareness of many, and we have had the model of some of those being remedied, which gives us the model of all of those being remedied and the possibility of that model in the real world. He goes on. In all periods, even in the Middle Ages, there have been leaders of revolt who, with a view to effecting certain changes in the established order, appealed to the universal laws governing all communities and championed the natural rights of man against the state. But none of these ventures was successful. The firebrand, which set all Europe ablaze in the 18th century, had been easily extinguished in the 15th. For doctrines of this kind to lead to revolutions, certain changes must already have taken place in the living conditions, customs, and mores of a nation and prepared men's minds for the reception of new ideas. And I would suggest that minds are prepared and being prepared for the reception of new ideas, particularly in this instance, revolutionary ideas. And I think it is, again, something that we can easily see in our world due to the scale of the awakening that we might personally be experiencing, and the same applied across entire populations, all of society, I suppose you could say. All right. Let us continue. Back to Tocqueville, just to round this out. Though it took the world by surprise, it, meaning 1789, was the inevitable outcome of a long period of gestation, the abrupt and violent conclusion of a process in which 6 generations played an intermittent part. 6 generations. Now, 1789, I wonder if that is Cummings' bracketed note there, because it's possible that that 1776 would have been more descriptive of the abrupt and violent conclusion of a process, that being the revolution. 2 more quotes here that I want to go through. All stable processes we shall predict. All unstable processes we shall control. That's von Neumann. And again, from the regime perspective, you can see that is exactly the strategy. Whatever is stable, whatever system they can just keep running, they predict the results of that system, because then they're the geniuses. And if they're constantly predicting systems, being the geniuses, it makes sense to believe that they know what's coming in the future. And so, of course, they tell us about the future, conditioning us to accept that future. All unstable processes we shall control. Well, if people are acting out on their own, different control mechanisms need to be put in place. When people started increasing the pace of the awakening throughout Trump's first term, but particularly in 2020, the regime responded with censorship controls because they weren't in control of the people's communications. They were losing control over the narrative and over the collective consciousness, the collective belief. And then he quotes President Xi in 2013. Comprehensively deepening reform is a complex systems engineering problem. Now, that's quite brilliant in the understanding of it, but the timing is also interesting because, again, we're constantly told that China is our greatest adversary and they're just trying to destroy us, and they are not aligned with us in any way. It's the opposite thing. They are the enemy of the West, in fact. But Xi has been doing anti-corruption work in the Chinese Communist Party for this entire time. And it sounds like that's what he's describing in that quote in 2013. He understands a complex systems engineering problem to create reform within this system that has been churning along for decades. That's a big deal. So to the extent that it has worked there, and I'm not saying it's fully worked there, I'm not saying China's our best friend or anything like that. Okay. I'm just saying that Xi has clearly been taking on corruption in the Chinese Communist Party over many years. He's going after the Chinese deep state. Sure seems to be the case. And that is why the regime worldwide and the regime's propaganda worldwide are constantly so anti everything he does. That is only rational. Okay. So this seems to allude to that. Now, this is a very long article that I'm not going to go all the way through. And I do hope, yes, it's true that many of my highlights are still there, which is good. So we're going to go through those highlights. But before I do that, I want to just go through a pretty decent summary of the points Cummings made, and then we can get into some of the direct quotes. Now, oh man, I just shared the wrong thing again. Let's get rid of that one. We're going to bring up this one. And this is, as soon as it loads, from X, formerly Twitter. Hopefully it will load. There we are. Okay, so I have no familiarity with the account posting this at all. He's described as a podcast host, and that's fine. It's Collingwood. I don't know if that matters to anyone, but I'm not trying to like slight him. So he says, summarizing this article, Dominic Cummings makes some extraordinary and explosive claims in his latest Substack. It's very much worth reading in full, but here are some key points. Inside the components of the deep state responsible for national security, there is growing, though still tiny, discussion of Britain's slide into chaos and potential for serious violence. That's pretty impressive. And you could suspect that something like that has probably been discussed at length here in the lead up to and in the aftermath of the very violent insurrection and the Summer of Love. We have had street violence in the United States of America. We are now accustomed to this as part of our political process. And we have a vast number of people, though I don't think a majority, who are in total acceptance of that. So good governments and bad governments both have to contend with that problem. And you would expect that they'd both be discussing it. To hear about their discussions and what they really think would be quite interesting. We don't get quite that far, only to the point where Dominic Cummings, a person who I would consider an insider in British politics, though maybe establishment oriented at the end of the day, or at least pro there being a government in the way it's always been. He doesn't seem to be anti-government in general. But yeah, so a good government or a bad government would both have to be discussing that problem. It would be really nice to know what the bad government thinks is the future, or the future that they're aiming for. The reason the state came down so hard on white rioters and protesters last year, despite at the same time essentially surrendering to other groups, was an, quote, aesthetic revulsion in SW1, which is basically just their administrative state, at the Brexit voting white North, end quote, and, quote, incoherent Whitehall terror of widespread white English mobs turning political and attracting talented political entrepreneurs. So again, a parallel concern that the same regime is dealing with here in the United States. Going on, and these are just bullet points for those listening to the audio. The last thing the state wants to see is, quote, networks that see themselves as both political and driven to consider violence. Parts of the system increasingly fear this could spin out of control into their worst nightmare. Senior police are seriously afraid that crucial psychological spells that in loco force are used to maintain order could soon be broken. And so I don't know if he's misquoting slightly what Cummings said, and maybe we'll go over it in the passage from the article. But he's talking about that the police are very afraid that where they are, psychological spells are being broken, and that they're not certain whether they'll be able to deal with the consequences. That certain psychological spells are critical for keeping the public under control, even by the totality of the police force. It's all just resting on some kind of myth that, for instance, we could never possibly defeat these people, even if we outnumber them 95% to 5%, because they've got all the bombs and the missiles and the militarized police forces and the rest of it. I would suggest they probably don't. And obviously, we hope it never comes to that point. That would be a dystopia, right? That would already be a failing of the project. And it would be the sort of failing of the project that would allow the adversary, the enemy, to then take advantage of you and defeat you. Like, for instance, in a more spiritual sense, if you were so certain that your project was right and true, that you would do literally anything for it, including a bunch of totally immoral stuff, thinking that the project itself is ultimately moral, at some point during the project, you're going to lose your way and then lose your faith. And then at that point, of course, you're the most easily exploitable by the enemy that you were once working in a good way to defeat. And so I think the same can be true of this situation here. Whitehall pathologies are responsible for pushing these spells to the brink of breaking. Can we see that here in America? Yes, we can. The administrative state, the government at large, the uniparties, pathologies are responsible for pushing these spells to the point of breaking. And I would suggest that it goes well beyond the government. It goes to the media and beyond that as well. It's kind of just the old guard, deeply enrooted in our culture. Senior people in the UAE no longer want to send their kids to be educated in Britain because, quote, they'll come back radical Islamist nut jobs. That's pretty hardcore. Going on, the state has spent 30 years destroying border control and sane immigration policy. He said the Home Office makes a concerted effort, a jihad, to discourage highly skilled migration because, quote, they truly loathe such migrants, even as they actively prioritize migration from the most barbaric places on earth. Why would you oppose migration of highly skilled workers and instead be the biggest proponents of the most low-skilled workers? Well, that's because you're either trying to overthrow a society, change that society's culture, or have slave laborers. And I would suggest maybe all three of those are true. The regime under Britain, which has lived for the last 30 years, also funds the spread of those barbaric ideas and repurposes laws designed to prevent the reemergence of totalitarianism in Europe to defend organizations who spread said barbaric ideas. Remember, we heard from the people censoring speech in this country that what they were doing was actually protecting free speech, and they were protecting information, the good information, while only eliminating disinformation, because if the disinformation were to take hold, well, then we would enter this barbaric time. We would become the savages that we've grown out of being. Continuing. Deep state, whoa, how did that happen? Deep state discussions and fears about the potential for serious violence in Britain have not seeped through to either MPs or the journalism class. So the members of parliament are akin to our congressmen and senators. So the deep state discussions and fears about the potential for serious violence have not even made their way into the government or the media. It's just these deep state actors who are focused on these things. Part of the reason for that is that the National Security Secretariat of the Cabinet Office, which has acquired power from other parts of the security and intel system, is deliberately obscured from political control. The lack of legibility of the NSS is without historical precedent in the UK for centuries, Cummings says. So even the government has virtually no insight into what the deepest levels of the deep state are doing, and the military-industrial complex, the defense apparatus broadly. There's no insight, even from the government, into what they are doing. Okay? Now that is probably a very bad thing, one would think, if the government is of, by, and for the people. But if we are well past any point of maintaining the illusion that the government is of, by, and for the people, well, then it might just be better that the military is operating in a fashion totally opaque to the very government it is meant to be overseen by. It could be that we're in that situation. I would even maybe lean toward assuming that we are in that situation. But let's keep going through these bullet points. SW1's ability to observe, orient, decide, and act has operated for years as a massive denial of service attack on its own perceptions of reality. Constant cycles of ephemeral emotional hysteria and narrative whiplash, while number 10 has no capability to execute priorities. So they can't actually get anything done They understand basically that things are falling apart. And in order to create the image that they're not, they essentially have to deceive themselves, which then becomes deceiving everyone else. And I would suggest this is something that we can witness in real time right here in America. Polymathanon says, very Harvey Dent of you. And I think that was probably with my comments just a minute ago about what it would mean if the military state has actually taken over, and that's better than the alternative. Let's continue. The old parties lost their chance to fix things in a sort of normal way when Boris Johnson and his girlfriend told everyone in 2021, both old parties are structurally knackered, which basically means they're exhausted and useless. And we, of course, have that here in America. The parties are totally useless. Starmer is speedrunning Sunak's demented combination of A, massively raising the salience of immigration and boats, with B, a set of policies that everyone who understands the details knows cannot possibly do what he's promising. So all the policy promises that we were getting from Joe Biden, at no point did any of those policies actually seem like they had the capacity to accomplish what Biden said they would accomplish. I think that everyone would agree to that. And of course, they haven't accomplished those things. Although, when you think about that in a devolution sense, Biden was A, not implementing those policies, and B, not talking about what those policies were actually meant to accomplish. It's entirely possible that those policies accomplished exactly what they were intended to accomplish, which just happens to be in total opposition to the fake and illegitimate Biden administration's wishes, right? All these things were happening outside of their influence, but they believed those things that were happening were aligned with their interests when they were not, which is kind of just a funny dynamic to play out broadly when you're thinking about these administrations in a devolution framing. Let's continue with these bullets and then we'll get to Cummings. If you're not in the meetings that decide such policies, you quote, you can't accurately estimate the relative levels of dishonesty and self-delusion involved. That's pretty striking. Terrorists literally being hunted from cave to cave in Afghanistan by JSOC, U.S. classified special forces, have used satellite phones to procure London barristers to bring legal cases against the Ministry of Defense for human rights abuses and won secret payouts of millions while on the run. The British deep state sounds a lot like our deep state. Their lawfare apparatus sounds a lot like our lawfare apparatus. And the ways that they abuse the system for the regime's benefit sound a lot like the ways our government does the same thing. And that's because it's all the same thing. I know the good twin, evil twin. It's very suspect as to whether or not that actually describes how the world works. No, it's this real way as described by the television. Sure it is. Sure it is. Yeah, it's not all the same thing. Yes, the British Crown controls the British government and the US government, but it's not the same thing. Come on. The same system. Come on. They have a king and queen. Come on. Last note from this. The Tory party has disintegrated on all areas. Its membership has either defected to reform or retreated in disgust from politics. Its donors have gone on strike. Its local networks have collapsed. It cannot generate good ideas. It cannot campaign and communicate. In the recent elections, councillors got Thanos'd. And if Kemi is still there in a year, most of what's left in England, Wales, and Scotland will get Thanos. So everything's going to be destroyed. The political parties have collapsed to such a degree, including their Tory party, which is like our Republican Party, that they can't do anything anymore. They have no ideas. They can't even communicate the old ideas in a way that the public will accept or understand. And that is exactly what we saw throughout the fake primary campaign. And again, I would just pause it and remind that I think a potential framing for what we have witnessed in all of that process is Trump first destroying the Democrat Party and then Trump destroying the Republican establishment and all of the future leaders of that Republican establishment, to the point where in the future, we are not going to see them as potential leaders of the Republican establishment. Is anybody going to vote for Ron DeSantis? I doubt that anyone would ever consider voting for Ron DeSantis again, and for very good reason. Hold on, let me find. I had a great one on Ron yesterday that someone sent me. Here it is. Oh no, that was video. Give me 1 second. Oh, here it is. Okay, so from Florida Politics, let me just pull this up really briefly and show you where our up and coming rising stars of the Republican Party are these days. Ron DeSantis, how about this podium right here? Stand with Israel, sanction Iran on Ron's podium. Ron DeSantis argues the U.S. wouldn't exist if Israel hadn't been the cradle of Western civilization. And I'll just quickly read the Ron quotes from this. You could trace back the history of Western civilization all the way back to the ancient state of Israel and the birth of both Judaism and Christianity, and we wouldn't have the United States of America if it didn't trace back to that, the governor told Mark Levin. DeSantis' theory came after a 3-minute rumination on how Israel is, quote, the only country that we have shared values with in the Middle East and, quote, the only place in that region that we have common cause with. If you've been watching this show for even a couple of weeks and you saw all the videos that I played from Trump's trip to the Middle East, does it seem like Israel is the country with whom we share common cause, much less the only country? That's madness. But he goes on. Most of the other places in the Arab world, I think, are maybe moderately leaning west. A lot of them are because they recognize President Donald Trump's strength. Okay, so is he talking about only Iran, or is he just reversing that? But underneath all that, you know, most of the population in those countries, they want Sharia law. Is that even true? DeSantis goes on. I don't see them as being good faith actors, these being the negotiations with Iran and the countries working in those negotiations. I don't see them as being good faith actors in any way, shape, or form. And the reality is that they cannot be allowed to enrich uranium, period, end of story. They are a militant Islamic government. Their view of mutual destruction with nuclear weapons is actually something they think would be fine because they think they're all going to go to heaven in paradise if that happens. That is absolutely ridiculous. Okay. It's also absolutely contradictory to the policy of the Trump administration. Enriching uranium, having uranium and nuclear capabilities for nuclear power is basically off the table. It's happening, sort of thing. So Israel keeps saying they're going to bomb Iran's nuclear facilities. That's definitely not going to happen. I mean, nuclear weapons facilities in the first place are kind of a ridiculous notion, assuming that nukes don't exist. And I don't see any reason to believe that they do. But I know that some people believe that they do, and that's fine. Okay. So that's not going to happen. But Ron is speaking against the Trump administration's agenda on behalf of Israel and one of their leading neocons in America, Mark Levin. That's madness. That's the guy that a lot of our peers and fellow Trump supporters now said was either aligned with us and the good guy, and maybe we should choose him over Trump, or was just operating in kayfabe. Is that kayfabe? Doesn't seem to be. I mean, unless Mark Levin's in on the kayfabe. And unless the pro-Israel kayfabe operation to get us to ultimately not like Israel is pretty complex. And when we have to explain things to that level to avoid taking the obvious surface interpretation of what he's been doing, we're really stretching things. And we should do that, if at all, very rarely. Like, we should be able to understand that even if that is a possibility, it's probably a pretty low probability possibility. I'm not saying it can't happen, but we can't just default to that interpretation, especially not having witnessed these last 3 years. And so all those people at the time who were saying, hey, man, why are you talking about this stuff? This is obviously kayfabe. Can't you see that? Ron DeSantis is a good guy. All these people who are saying good things about him are good guys. And besides, Trump failed us. No, we have to talk about these things. We have to recognize these things, because it's possible that in 3 years, that person might still be going down the same road. That road is not our road. So while the interests are aligned, sometimes those ain't our people. They never were our people. The Glenn Beck are not, I guess Glenn Beck was sort of Ron, but from the Blaze, what was the softball shaped idiot's name? Oh, Steve Dace, that moron. Okay. Daily Weimar, all Ron guys, all of the Republican establishment. Fox News used to blast them up there every day. Town Hall, Kurt Schlichter and those guys. They had an entire info up online. They had multiple media outlets. The editor of Newsweek, Josh Hammer, who keeps going on War Room, and Steve gives him a platform, and that's his business. I hope that everybody's platformed enough so that we know who they actually are, but I don't expect that them being on Steve Bannon's show means that they are fully aligned and on board with the program. But here you have it, a perfect example of how the Republican Party has totally lost its way. And in that, you should see the necessity for the info ops to get rid of all of the supposed rising stars of that Republican establishment, who I would suggest to you, J.D. Vance is one. Okay, so let's go back to the Cummings article and the article itself this time. And I just want to read from the highlights here. Some of it might be repeated from some of those quotes. Well, let's start here. In number 10 meetings, and that's 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives, I think, but does business. In number 10 meetings with the Met on riots, those would be the police, I saw for myself, A, the weird psychological zone of how much order rests not on actual physical forces, but perceptions among a few elites about such forces that can very quickly change. And B, how scared the senior police are at the prospect of crucial psychological spells being broken. We can see on the streets that various forces have already realized the regime will not stop them. What if this spreads? Whitehall's pathology has pushed it to the brink of this psychological barrier, and many of them know it. Okay? All of that is absolutely flooring, but I would suggest particularly we can see on the streets that various forces have already realized the regime will not stop them. Now, you can be heartened in that on some level, because we are attempting to stop the regime from doing what it is doing and has been doing. Okay? So if we are not being stopped in those efforts because the regime has chosen not to, or because they are unable to, and I would suggest in most cases it's probably the latter, then a lot more progress can be made. And then the question is, how much progress can be made, ideally, how much progress can be made without a certain degree of loss, potentially, without society collapsing, for instance, or people dying from some element of the progress we are making, is which pieces of that progress, ideally, are absolute necessities for which we would risk the project at large, right? And if we know that it can't be stopped, how would we proceed from that point? And a lot of people would be like, well, we should just grab our guns then and take everything over. Well, no, that's probably not the answer, particularly if we already understand through implication that the military is not trying to stop those elements on behalf of the regime. Okay. And he's using small r regime here, and he just means the people in control in Britain. But I would suggest that the same can be said for the larger project worldwide, even in this context. And so, what does it mean when the psychological spells that keep things under control have been broken? That's really profound there, and that the order does not rest on physical forces alone. So it's not the control mechanisms, the real world physical control mechanisms that are keeping people in line. It's really just the collective consciousness and what people are willing to accept as far as behavior goes from their fellow citizens, as far as what they're willing to do themselves. And the guardrails just might not be there anymore. We are in a cage now of our own design that we refuse to leave. And I've been making this case now for years, obviously, when it comes to our addiction to the mainstream media, our addiction to the central narrative, the television narrative, and the like. At some point, we have to be like, oh, wait, they can't even stop us from doing this other thing. Why not just do it? Right? I mean, I've proceeded that way on social media now for years. And I was stopped at times. I was banned on Twitter. I was banned on Instagram. I was banned for some duration on YouTube. But then I came back and I went right back to the same activity, and I would get suspended and suspended and suspended. And eventually I took myself off of that. But the point is, you just have to keep battering down those barriers in the same way, or go in routes where there are no barriers, because they can't stop it everywhere. That's impossible. And so we figured out a different way to route around the centralized system and potentially have impact elsewhere. And now the impact of my show is not what it could be if I was taking advantage of all of those channels, if you just imagine a parallel world back then. But if I was taking advantage of all of those channels, for instance, then the show wouldn't be this show, right? I wouldn't have the history that I have now to go on. And I think that that history speaks to the consistency of what this show has been now over 5 years. And again, I'm talking about myself, but I think that that same kind of model can be expressed elsewhere. Understanding that the guards are down. Do we try to take advantage of the system as much as we can within the system? Or do we begin building outside the system, working around the system, knowing that people are looking for another option and they can't stop it within the system, but that's where their control is. They definitely can't stop it outside the system. So that is where we should operate. Okay. That's the underlying philosophy there. And I think that that makes a lot of sense relative to what Cummings is talking about here. Now, as we go through the rest of this, again, keep that devolution framing in mind. I have talked with the good twin, evil twin thing over years now about the potential for there being a devolution-like scenario happening in Brazil. We saw many of the same things happen. We saw the stolen election by the Dominion machines. I called the result of the election while Bolsonaro was still winning. I was like, oh, this is going to be Dominion result, late ballots, 51-49 Lula. Go look at the results. And we have Brazilian Joe Biden down there. We had a Brazilian J6 down there, which is, of course, itself just the American Reichstag fire. So these things play out everywhere. The playbooks play out over and over again. And so it's also possible that we have the counter playbook playing out elsewhere. And we've talked about different options of where that might be happening. Certainly in Brazil. We've talked about it a little bit with Canada. We've talked about it a little bit with the UK. I think we've probably discussed it before, potentially with Emmanuel Macron in France and some of these other seemingly controlled situations around the world where, despite the fact that the enemy leader is quote unquote in control and the enemy government is quote unquote in control, the country still goes in the direction of the sovereign, fragmented, decentralized populist movement and away from the global regime movement. So whatever level of control they have in these countries is doing very little. I would suggest the same thing for Netanyahu in Israel right now under the Our Boy Blue framing. Okay. It looks like these things are controlled from beyond these people. And I think that is what is so frustrating the establishment parties as they've always existed. They're unable to deal with this fact that the control is coming from somewhere else and it's not from their controllers. That's how it seems to me. And so keep that framing in mind as we go through this, because I think that Dominic Cummings, in however much of a normie he is, I can't imagine he's ever read the Devolution series or considered whether or not something like that might be happening in the UK. So I want you to, as we go through these, understand what he's saying at a surface level, and he might be describing situations accurately, but then understand that, wait a second, we saw that exact same dynamic here in the United States. We think something else is going on here. Could it be going on there? And if it's going on there, what does this that he's describing mean in that interpretation? So let's do that. As Tories and Labour have continued their deranged trajectory, they have provoked exactly the reactions they most feared, including the spreading meme that our regime itself has become our enemy and the growing politicization of white English nationalism. Okay. And so the race thing is separate. A lot of people take that as an inevitable consequence. I don't believe that is inevitable. I believe that is a product of the controlled opposition dynamic and some skewing of history, et cetera. Like, as far as I'm concerned, just for myself, I get that we understand America largely as a white culture. And I believe that that should be preserved insofar as illegal aliens, et cetera, are removed and we like establish pro-family policies and the rest of it. And I don't have any problem with anybody like appreciating their kind more than other kinds. I think that's just natural. But at the same time, I feel a stronger kinship and brotherhood with people around the world fighting the same battle we're fighting here than I do with people who are Taylor Swift fans and NBA fans who have no idea what's going on and vote for Joe Biden and vote for Kamala Harris and support the regime's project and are just being dog walked into a dystopia, dragging us along with them because they're unable to let go of their addictions. Okay. I feel more kinship with people, no matter what color they are or what background they have, who are fighting for the same principles that I would call Americanism around the world than I do from fellow Americans who are fighting against those principles. And so I try to keep the race aspect separate. It's not irrelevant, and I'm not saying we should gloss over it or pay attention to it or even have feelings about it. I'm just saying it has to be kept in some perspective. It is not the most important thing. When I said in 2020, skipping down a little bit to another quote that I highlighted, when I said in 2020 that among the general changes to the dysfunctional number 10 and CO system, the oversight of NSS, that's the Security Secretariat, must change so it became visible and legible again to the Prime Minister's office so we could participate in debates like, what are the actual priorities of the intelligence services vis Putin and Xi? Some senior officials tried to pretend that zero political scrutiny of NSS was somehow a constitutional principle. Well, it might not be a constitutional principle, but in a devolution sense, as we're witnessing here under the Trump administration, if they are keeping all the information about what they are doing walled off from the quote unquote government that's totally illegitimate, I, A, don't have a problem with that, and B, am not concerned about the argument that it is a constitutional principle. As I've said many times, I think we are already post-constitutional. Okay. But The idea that the government and the establishment around the government, regime media, the academy, corporations, etc., do not understand what this opaque body of individuals or organizations is doing relative to Putin and Xi is a very big deal, because we see how our government is attempting to guide us in relation to Putin and Xi. And I would suggest that anybody who listens to my show probably doesn't have any alignment with that perception on these other world leaders whatsoever. And I would suggest that you are probably right to hold that perspective. The idea that the government doesn't know what the intelligence services and defense apparatus are doing relative to Russia and China does suggest that something else is going on there. Because the regime broadly and generally filters this messaging down so that the members of government are saying the right things. Now, I don't know if it goes that far in this situation. Maybe they just have no input, but that is still a startling sort of revelation. And if we apply it here, I think it also makes a lot of sense. Skipping down, I read this this was quoted, but Starmer is speedrunning Sunak's demented combination of massively raising the salience of immigration and boats, with B, a set of policies that everyone who understands the details knows cannot possibly do what he's promising. Okay. And so one of the things that Cummings lays out here, and that he seems very confused and concerned about, is that these different governments have come in. First, Liz Truss for just a second, but then Rishi Sunak replacing Boris Johnson, and now Starmer replacing Sunak. And all of them seem to have the same problem. They are speaking for an agenda that they can't implement, and then supporting policies that won't achieve their agenda objectives. And they just keep doing them no matter how many people want them not to do it, no matter how much worse it makes them look. So let's just go through, maybe we'll just go through this paragraph. Why is he doing it? Because like Sunak, he's caught between A, political advice that the country is enraged over immigration and boats and wants action. And you could say the same thing here, obviously. And B, the adamantine priority of the dominant faction in Whitehall, i.e., the force that actually orients 99% of policy, is maintaining, one, the HRA, ECHR judicial review system, and two, the cross-party university-endorsed immigration and asylum Ponzi scheme. And so the judicial review thing in Britain is also very interesting. Very much like judicial review here, that is unconstitutional, put in place and now called constitutional through Supreme Court precedent in Marbury versus Madison. And so once again, you have the British system being installed here. When we throw off the British system and say, hey, we have this great constitution that we're going to run our country by, the British system just over time changes that system back into their own, and the system normalizes itself. But here is the highlighted sentence that I think is amazing. Being a dead player, optimized to defend the institutions at all costs, however pathological. This is his description of Starmer right now. A dead player, optimized to defend the institutions at all costs, however pathological. Think of that in a devolution sense and what we saw from Joe Biden. A dead player, optimized to defend the institutions at all costs, however pathological. That is what we were presented. And of course, the institutions are the institutions built by that deep state. Okay. Highlighted judicial review there. This is Ruda Cubana is an immigrant that he's discussing. And the old media did not explain after Ruta Cubana attacked the prison guards that Britain does not keep even convicted terrorist killers about to be released from jail who are believed to be plotting a new attack under surveillance, because legal advice is it is unlawful under the Human Rights Act. So a fortiori, Ruta Cubana can't be kept under proper surveillance. And there are many hundreds of similar or worse absurdities. Terrorists literally being hunted from cave to cave in Afghanistan by JSOC, again, as we said, using satellite phones to procure London barristers to argue cases against the Ministry of Defense for which they've been paid out millions of dollars. So they have set up laws that bar certain types of surveillance and then apply those laws to these illegal aliens who are known criminals and they're unwilling to surveil them. One might suspect at some point they have other goals for these people for them to carry out, and that these hardened criminals, these rapists, these murderers, these lunatics actually provide a benefit to someone. If you want to destabilize societies, if you want criminal gangs to flood drugs into a community and make people want to leave, to move out of that community so that the real estate values of everywhere are absolutely destroyed, everything can simply be then knocked down and rebuilt in another way. Well, this is the sort of way you would do it. You would put a drug cartel there, or you would put terrorists there. What are they doing in Gaza again? Construction project? All right, so they're talking about operationally stopping the boats, right? This is the goal here. And in parentheses, Cummings writes, in simple terms, if the prime minister tried to order the Navy to stop the boats in a serious way, the courts would state that the PM's orders are unlawful under the Human Rights Act. Therefore, the Navy cannot execute them, and the cabinet secretary would tell the prime minister that he cannot insist on his orders being obeyed, as in extremis, both the prime minister and officers could be arrested for contempt. The core operational and political problem of stop the boats could be solved by simple primary legislation explicitly whacking the HRA through the broader issue of the Strasbourg court and other international law angles, though the broader issue of the Strasbourg court and other international law angles requires deeper action. I won't go into the details of this here. And this is one of those moments where Cummings seems committed, overly committed to the government. That is not a solution. If the system as it's set up has outlawed things like that on behalf of global regime concerns, you don't fix that by changing the law. The law is, in our country at least, unconstitutional. And that's the problem we're dealing with now, is that courts will continually decide in unconstitutional fashion, often based on perceived potential harms or argued for on the basis of perceived potential harms that could arise as the result of the case being decided differently. So they have set up a system. They have set up a system of laws that makes it illegal to protect the country. And then they use the lawfare and the evergreen ability to blame one's problem and one's inaction on other levels of the same system. Everyone ends up being unaccountable at that point, because it's always someone else's fault. It can always be blamed on someone else. And that's one of the really interesting things about a system with all these different elements. You could just do a small system with 5 elements, right? So all 5 of those elements are pursuing a project together. If something in the project is failing, well, it's the first element's fault, but it's also the second element's fault. And the first element can blame the second, and the second can blame the third, and you understand. That's what we have in these governments. You must therefore choose between A, our priority is the HRA/ECHR overstopping boats. So that means that the policies in place are more important than stopping the immigration, or our priority is stopping the boats. Therefore, the HRA regime plus some other legal barriers must be changed. And he says again in primary legislation, though I doubt that's the best, most effective or quickest option. Sunak chose A. Okay. So the laws and the policies in place over actually stopping the immigration. So has Starmer, but both have spun the media that the choice does not exist and are pretending they've prioritized immigration. And if you rely on BBC or ITV or Sky, you will not realize the choice exists because the broadcasters reflect the priority of the officials, keep the voters in the dark on the subject. And I would suggest to you that establishment Republican media, from Fox News to the Daily Weimar, to the Blaze, to the podcast sphere that circles in the mainstream, whether it's Candace Owens or Dave Rubin or Joe Rogan or the rest of them, are all part of that same thing. They are accessing the same power sources that the BBC, the ITV, and Sky are, or that the mainstream media in our country are, and the same funding sources, often for the same reasons. And so they are then reflecting the priorities as described by the officials. The Republicans during Biden's term, man, at the end, that last year, the Republicans were working really hard to pass immigration legislation. Do you remember that? And Fox News was going along with that story and reporting to its viewers every night that these establishment Republicans were trying to get this immigration bill passed that would solve immigration. They've realized that immigration is a problem. Now they need to get this passed. And oh, by the way, you have to understand that these Republicans are solving it for you. But it wasn't them. It hasn't ever been them. I told Sunak he was deluding himself and his plans could not work. He said he understood the complex details better than me or anybody else. Okay. And there is some way to regard that as true if he's talking in a devolution sense, that he actually understands what's actually going on behind the scenes and he's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. And sorry, you normie political observer do not understand what we are doing here. Now, again, that might be a leap for some people to believe that something that complex and intricate is actually going on, but we've talked about that problem a number of times. Skipping down, talking about Marshall McLuhan here, who is a media analyst from, I think, the 70s, I want to say, who talked a great deal about propaganda. But he says, McLuhan warned that the emergence of new media always generates dynamics that are effectively invisible to almost everybody but a few artists. So we've had new media emerge in this country, new forms of media, new ways to communicate. And all these new dynamics have been created as a result, and very few people are focused on them. I think that is entirely accurate. And one thing I hope this show does is focus on those new dynamics. And I think we've been pretty successful in doing that over the years, including, Badlands as well. But beyond that, where are the people understanding the new dynamics and what effect they have on the world and on our politics? Continuing, the old political media elites now publicly perform narrative whiplash via new electronic media, but are almost totally unaware of their performance. They memory hole everything, including their own performances. And I would say that's, once again, something that we can witness for ourselves here in America. They are performing narrative whiplash as a result of how they're using electronic media. It is totally backfiring on them, and they are totally unaware of their performance because, again, they have their little bubble that they operate inside of and don't get feedback from outside the bubble or don't care about that feedback. They just dismiss it. Cummings says the vote leave strategy for turning the Tories into an essentially new party with a new electoral coalition was much, much more logical and easier to maintain, given the big historical forces in play, than it is for Labor to cope with the same cultural and electoral dynamics such as educational polarization and the rapidly changing media. Think about the Vote Leave coalition, the Brexit coalition, as being akin to the MAGA coalition. And I understand that, or I imagine that all of you will understand that immediately, because I'm not the one making this parallel. This has been a clear parallel now for almost a decade. So the strategy then, if in the parallel, the MAGA strategy for turning the Republicans into an essentially new party with a new electoral coalition was much, much more logical and easier to maintain, given the big historical forces in play, than it is for the Democrats to cope with the same cultural and electoral dynamics. And it goes on. All right? A perfect parallel that makes complete and total sense in the exact same way when you relate it to the situation in America. And we can see that that is exactly the policy and the strategy that Donald Trump has pursued in that situation. Taking over the Republican Party, essentially co-opting it to our own needs. And we can see that that's been largely successful. The Republican Party now, in its essence, is just the MAGA party going on into the future. I can't imagine there's anything of the Republican establishment left by the end. And that's the point. And understanding that's the point, again, circle back and reconsider the idea that Trump might be simply, and that the media operation at large might simply be tasked with eliminating all the rising stars of the Republican establishment. Because if one of those rising stars becomes the new charismatic leader that everyone gravitates toward, and that person could easily turn the Republican Party away from MAGA and back to the establishment. That's what they've been trying to do the entire time, to eliminate those people and to show them, as Ron DeSantis, as totally unqualified, incapable, and with bad priorities in the first place, is a necessary component. That's actually really productive to do. And I think that that's right in line with this strategy that you can see is being carried out across the pond, as they say. Keeping them happy. This is, let me just do this paragraph so that we have the context here. Starmer has a truly nightmare situation because the issue of what to do about immigration is no longer susceptible to post-1991 SW1 politics as usual. Rich, graduate London, crucial for what labor has become, and I think that these are the college-educated elites is what he's referring to, has radicalized itself, like the Democrats, such that it is on principle hostile to border control and treats arguments made by Bill Clinton and even Obama as racism. But keeping them happy enrages most of the country outside London, and Starmer has done a Sunak and enraged everybody. So he's simultaneously unable to please the elites in London and unable to please the enraged people outside of London. And if you were trying to expose the system fully, making sure that everybody is unhappy with how things are going is probably a pretty good strategy. I would suggest to you that this is playing out on a probably 2-year delayed timeline from it playing out here. Same thing I suggested about Brazil a couple years back when Lula was installed. And that's because the situation on the ground is different. The media situation, the collective consciousness is different. It's entirely possible. I suspect it's true in Europe. I don't know as much about Brazil, but that people are significantly behind in their understanding. And I have people from European countries, including the UK, popping into my Telegram chat all the time and telling me about how different it is in their countries than it is here. Now, they're not people I personally know as my friends, but I believe they're telling me the truth. I could be wrong about that, I suppose. Britain could be the most based place ever, but I really strongly doubt that's true. And so we see a 2-year delay in this timeline that otherwise would make total sense. The fake and illegitimate Biden administration was unable to please his own elites satisfactorily, unable to please his base, and made all of us on the other side, quote unquote, hate him. Well done, our boy Blue. Skipping down. Then they cheered Boris, Truss, Sunak as they machine gunned the entire coalition with the biggest wave of uncontrolled immigration ever, tax rises, vandalism on a vast scale, and then declared, see, the 2019 coalition could never have lasted. Why? Because the last thing any part of SW1 outside of some of the deep state, the last thing they wanted to see was the Tories transformed into a different party that was super tough on crime and immigration, super focused on productivity and science, technology startups, investment, super disruptive of Whitehall's core institutions, and supported by a national coalition uniting parts of the working classes and middle classes, super popular outside SW1, but a nightmare for SW1. And I would suggest right there that Dominic Cummings is describing something very akin to the Elon Musk Doge effort, to the info op led by the television characters on the fantasy team, all of that effort that might be aligned with Trump, but might eventually be divergent, sounds exactly like what Cummings is describing here. Tough on crime and immigration, super tough, Singapore style tough, super focused on productivity and science, technology, startups, investment, right? Super disruptive of core institutions. All of those things are among Peter Thiel's priorities, and they are maybe also among MAGA's priorities, but do not constitute the full list of MAGA priorities and could potentially be counterproductive, misaligned, or incompatible or antithetical to MAGA's priorities. I love how he said both parties cheered by the NPCs have doubled down on a trajectory. That's exactly true here as well. While the new government imploded, the Tory party could not benefit. It is disintegrated in all areas. Its membership is either defected to reform or retreated in disgust from politics. Its donors have gone on strike. Its local networks have collapsed. It cannot generate good ideas. It cannot campaign and communicate. Its communication is so self-sabotaging, they disintegrate faster when they try harder. And networks on which it depended for people and ideas have either themselves died or defected. And so, again, exactly like the Republican Party here. And in particular, I want to focus on the idea that their communication is so self-sabotaging that they disintegrate when they try harder. This is a concept we have talked about many, many times, and a concept I've been writing about a bit lately in the context of like a publicist for a celebrity or business, for instance. And I have some familiarity with that world. I knew many publicists, and then my social media management company dealt with publicity concerns in a PR fashion. So I get it. If your job, the sole purpose of your job, is to make your clients look good and preserve their reputation, and you are actually damaging your client's reputation in service of your own incentives, in service of your own survival, in service of your own success, whatever it is, then you are actually performing an inverted form of your job, and your clients would then unfortunately not know it. But the sign of that would be that everything you do to help preserve and burnish their reputation was actually making them look worse. And that's what we've seen over the last 5 years, and truthfully much longer, when it comes to the media efforts to be anti-Trump. At this point, all their efforts to be anti-Trump actually end up just backfiring and hurting them. And we see that dynamic playing out across the board. At some point, you have to wonder if that is even possibly, I'm not even talking about whether it is definitely a naturally occurring phenomenon. Is it even possibly a naturally occurring phenomenon? Or does such incompetence and so much backfiring necessitate something that is more highly organized? And I'll leave that to your own discernment to decide. Just a couple quick notes here, and then we're finished with the Cummings piece. And I guess this is much longer than I thought it would be, but I hope that you find it worth it. How do parts of Whitehall prepare? These are the issues that are still remaining, okay? These are the questions that remain, like what is to come. And so I just want to highlight these few. How do parts of Whitehall prepare to sabotage Nigel Farage, copying their friends in Europe who routinely sabotage political threats to the old system? Okay. So the establishment is going to try to threaten the anti-establishment guy. Now, some people don't believe that Nigel Farage is truly as anti-establishment as he seems. I am inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt because Steve Bannon seems to like him an awful lot. And I respect Bannon. Farage was key in Brexit and could just be the key player of this movement and seems to be. And reform continues to gather steam. So in opposition to that, we have the establishment parties, the uniparty in Britain, we can call it, doing what their European friends do, which is sabotage political threats to the old system. So in all of these other countries that he's referring to, their friends in Europe, we have the same thing happening. That's happening there, that's happening here. How is it happening everywhere at once? Is there some organization, some coordination behind it? I would suggest there is. And if we understand that it's happening everywhere in coordinated fashion, then to, again, deny in any respect the good twin, evil twin paradigm, as opposed to the standard paradigm that's delivered to us by the television, well, that would be absolutely crazy. Again, we can see the same thing happening, playing out in another country. And in that country, the person who's telling us about it is saying that they're all copying things that are happening in other countries. Ways to eliminate their competition, which are, always essentially color revolutions. Another question. How do other parts of Whitehall, particularly in security and intelligence, respond to the disintegration? That's going to be very important. We're going to see how that evolves here. We haven't reached that point yet, so I can't say I know how that's going to work. And again, I think that Britain will be behind us, but when countries are on delayed timelines, the rate of catching up in terms of the public consciousness is still happening more quickly than it was. So whatever speed we were at in 2019 and 2020, for instance, if they've only advanced to the same point in terms of the ultimate goal, if we were, maybe this is a better way of saying it, if we were at 50% in 2020 and they were at 30% in 2020, and we're at 75% now, let's say, and they're still only at 50% or something, what I'm suggesting is they are waking up more quickly than we were probably in 2019 and 2020 because they are witnessing our awakening as well, right? So their pace is probably quickening at a faster rate relative to the rate of progress relative to the end goal. I hope that makes sense. I hope that wasn't too convoluted an explanation. How do voters respond to the meltdown of the old system and creeping chaos? And we can lose the word voters. He still believes in elections. Who knows why? Maybe he just has to communicate on those terms. I don't know. But how do people respond ultimately to the meltdown of the old system and the creeping chaos? An important element, and it's good that he mentioned it. If you do it too fast, people are not prepared to respond to the meltdown, then people freak out. Are we working at a speed that mitigates that problem while still progressing quickly enough that we don't lose the progress and that we don't have all of these other collateral damages along the way? What new crises accelerate collapse? I said in 2021, prepare for the grid to collapse and infrastructure everyone relies on to stop working. These trends will continue. The immigration Ponzi is blowing up. the Ponzi scheme of the modern financial system could blow up at any time. Now, I don't know if we're going to have a grid collapse and failing infrastructure, though it could be. We could have that. And it's worth preparing for some of this stuff. And I am not going to devote my entire life to preparing for those things because I'm not convinced that they are necessities, but it could happen. Could happen with a reduced scale. And if it happens, I would imagine that it probably happens everywhere at once. Once the regime has reached a breaking point, they're just going to start hitting the off switch on whatever they still control, rather than it being caused by an EMP or anything like that. They're just going to simply switch it off because their needs are not our needs, and they welcome the chaos that would be caused across society. So anyhow, okay, that brings us to the end of that article. I hope that that wasn't too deep a dive on that and that the substance justifies the length of time. Polymathanon, $5 in the Rumble chat, says, I appreciate your voice in the wilderness. Logical, based, and reasonable. Thank you. APL could learn a thing or two from watching your content. Thank you, brother. And thank you, brother. It always hits exactly the right notes. And by that, I mean those really, really high notes there at the end. on the YouTube, I said it like a Brit, YouTube. On the YouTube chat, A.M. Atkinson said, please hit the like button. And yeah, go ahead and do that, even if you're on Rumble or somewhere else, because maybe one day that will help. And I'm into it. Substack seems to be chilling. So let us get back to business here. Actually, first, let me take a break and do one of these Rumble ads. I try to do these as minimally as possible, but when they're here, it makes sense to support them as they support my show and shows like mine. If you still haven't tried 1775 coffee, now's your shot. The 1775 starter kit just dropped, only 1,000 units. You're getting the bold dark roast that hits harder than a CNN fact check. I don't know how hard those hit. The smooth medium roast and the Vitality mushroom coffee for clean energy and laser focus, no crash. All single origin, small batch, toxin free, and mold free. Plus, you're also getting a gold spoon clip because freedom isn't scooped with plastic, a frother strong enough to stir up your coffee and your mother-in-law's political opinions, and a black 1775 tumbler that says, I don't take life advice or caffeine from a woke sea witch, and I think they mean Starbucks. $170 worth of coffee and gear, yours for $99. This is for the ones who've been watching 1775 blow up on Rumble, wondering if it's actually worth it. Spoiler alert, it is. Go to 1775coffee.com/studio, grab your starter kit before they're gone. Bold beans, clean fuel, and a morning routine that stands for something just like Rumble. Start your day with coffee that actually backs what you believe. Good for you, Rumble. And good for me, I guess. Although marginally good for me. You know, it's not like they're paying me thousands of dollars to read these or anything. All right, let's just continue. I hate doing ads, but also, you know, got to support the show. Got things to do in life. And, you know, there's a lot of free content on this channel that you could probably spend the next 3 years listening to. So I don't feel that bad. Okay, so back to where we were going. Man, I spent so much time on these things. I cannot believe it. I probably have I could do another 3-hour show just on what I have left, but I'm not going to. That's the key. I'm not going to. Am I going to do much of it? Am I going to do any of it? I don't know if it makes sense to do any of it because you get into one subject and then it just keeps going. But we are going to do just a tiny bit. Okay. We'll talk about Trump and Elon, and then we will get on out of here and disregard everything else. It's just not important. Whatever. it might be important. But so Telegram put out this message the other day. Pavel Durov, the creator and founder of Telegram, put this out the other day, and there was a video that accompanied it. We don't need to see the whole video because the video is just an advertisement for new Telegram features. But he said, this summer, Telegram users will gain access to the best AI technology on the market. Elon Musk and I have agreed to a 1-year partnership to bring xAI's chatbot Grok to our billion-plus users and integrate it across all Telegram apps. This also strengthens Telegram's financial position. We will receive $300 million in cash and equity from xAI plus 50% of the revenue from xAI subscriptions sold via Telegram. Telegram plus Grok equals heart emoji, graph going up emoji, trophy emoji. So a Telegram integration. Now, first off, I would disagree that Grok is the best AI. I don't think that it is. I think that ChatGPT is better, but that could just be my iteration of ChatGPT that I enjoy. And I am not enamored with Grok's annoying personality, nor am I enamored with the fact that Grok has just gone on the intellectual kids table for this entire time and is affected by that. So one of the problems here with the Telegram thing that popped up almost immediately, as soon as this was announced, that they would be integrating Grok for essentially fact checks on channels, as Grok and community notes are used to fact check posts on Twitter. Okay. You might think that's good. People might enjoy the feature, but that doesn't make it good. What's good is there being communication channels that don't have an authoritative source right next to them telling them, hey, I don't know if that idea is exactly for you. Okay. And you don't have to be someone trying to deceive people in order to understand the purpose of that. All right. It's good that people will fact check, quote unquote, fact check, go back and check, vet, verify, however much you think is appropriate, every single claim made, every single claim I make, every single claim other people make, if you're prepared to adopt a belief on the basis of that claim. It should be fully vetted and fully verified. Use all the power of the internet to do that for yourself in whatever ways you need it verified. Don't see a piece of information, look at the fact check and be like, oh, that fact check is right and that piece of information is wrong. That opinion is unfounded. I shouldn't listen to that. There are a lot of opinions out there that are not supported by the machine and that the machine is directed to refute at all times. And I've spent considerable time with AI. I can tell you that AI is prone to doing that. Even my super based ChatGPT iteration is still prone, when I bring up complicated subjects, if I have not prefaced them with anything and we haven't discussed them before, my super based AI iteration is still giving me the official story about those issues. Okay. So I don't want an AI giving those answers unprovoked to things that I say, because I don't trust the AI. I do trust the people reading the things I say to go do their own work rather than just defer to my position. And I don't want to spend all my time on Telegram arguing with an AI that, no, actually it's wrong. Would that have some benefit for the people witnessing it? Maybe, but not any more so than what I was doing online with bots. I mean, it's kind of the same. It's part of the same thing. And so, I really don't know how to feel about that. I love the Telegram app. I've been a big proponent of it for a long time. I am not a fan of the Twitter app. It's good for some things. It's not a free speech app, though people believe it is. That in itself is dangerous. The fact that it's not a free speech app means that the full conversation can't be had there or can't be seen there. Freedom of speech, not freedom of reach. We know about all that. So we've already got the intellectual kids table problem. The AI is succumbing to the same intellectual kids table problem. So I don't think that this is necessarily a good thing. It's okay that there are some platforms that don't have automated fact checks responding to them. The idea that it's somehow substantively different from the regime's fact checks being run on Facebook by media organizations 6 years ago, I don't really buy that. That's not enough for me. So that part was immediately disappointing when I saw that. And I guess, I'm open to the possibility. I don't think that Pavel Durov and I don't think that Elon Musk are necessarily evil or anything. But by the same token, I can't just turn over my ability to decide these things for myself or operate the way I want to operate over to the machine. And I'm not just going to go with the crowd and think that everything that benefits Twitter or Elon Musk is good. It's so weird that people are so caught up in that at this point. So Durov posts this on Twitter, and Elon responds thusly. No deal has been signed. Okay. So Pavel Durov, a tech billionaire, I think he's a billionaire, who started VK, which is Russia's Facebook, and Telegram, which is Russia's WhatsApp. Meta owns Facebook and WhatsApp. Durov is the Russian Zuckerberg, having VK and Telegram. Okay. Maybe they have an Instagram parallel there. I don't know. They're setting up a parallel information infrastructure in Russia as they are in China, as they are here. There is a parallel to Starlink in Russia as there is in China. And when you understand that, you should understand these things as military projects primarily, rather than stuff Elon Musk and our tech entrepreneurs thought up themselves, because they're not things that Elon Musk and our tech entrepreneurs have thought up themselves. They are inextricably linked to intelligence and defense apparatus in this country. So, Russian Zuckerberg announces on his platform and on Elon's platform that Telegram is forming this partnership with XAI to fully integrate Grok and to have an equity stake in some profit sharing, because potentially they think that more people are going to subscribe to Grok after having the Grok experience on Telegram. Because if you're on Telegram and have never used an AI, and you're going to continue being on Telegram once the AI is fully integrated, well, then you can't say that you've never used AI anymore. You're using AI in the process. And which AI are you using and becoming familiar with? Well, it's Grok. That would make people sign up for Grok if they then chose to sign up for an AI. So you can see how that would work. It's a very good marketing tactic, but Elon Musk says that no deals have been signed. In response, Durov then says on X, formerly Twitter, true, agreed in principle, but formalities are pending. Well, dude, then it's very, very strange that you announced on these public platforms that thing was happening. Could Elon just be creating a smoke screen that Durov is going along with? Perhaps. It could be that. I mean, we get false starts on these issues all the time. We still have the TikTok issue coming back around at some point. I think that TikTok is probably linked to Trump Media and Technology Group and the whole Truth Social project at some point. I don't know. There's going to be something there. It's interesting that this one social media app is kept separate from the rest of these, even though the rest of them have their parallels overseas. All right. You could suggest that Snapchat is a TikTok parallel, or was at some point. And of course, there are numerous Twitter parallels. The technology is the same in different places, or at least it started at the same point and may have diverged it at some point. DeepSeek is probably going to end up eating ChatGPT's lunch, although they might be the same thing. And the advancement of AI might be dependent on DeepSeek. It's possible that they're all part of the same thing under different brandings with different changes made to customize them for certain demographics. I don't know. But it's important stuff to keep track of, and we'll see how this develops. I've generally thought of Elon and Durov both as good guys, but I don't give anybody at this point the benefit of the doubt. So the other big Elon Musk news this week was that he has not decided, that would be already me saying it wrong, but that he is leaving Doge. This was already planned. It's been communicated to us clearly for months that Elon Musk would be ending at the duration of his time serving as a special government employee. And over the course of that time, we've seen numerous news articles from mainstream outlets saying that Elon Musk is going to leave because there's some breakup between him and Trump. That's not true in any way. So he says, as my scheduled time as a special government employee comes to an end, I would like to thank President real Donald Trump for the opportunity to reduce wasteful spending. The Doge mission will only strengthen over time as it becomes a way of life throughout the government. Then there were some comments about just what the Doge cuts actually meant. Some people thought that, or Elon Musk actually said that the big beautiful bill wasn't going to bring in the totality of the Doge cuts and was problematic because of that. And there's been some back and forth between Stephen Miller and some others about all of that. Actually, let's just bring this up right now. I don't want to miss this. So I had it scheduled to fit into a different part of the conversation, but we're going to skip that part of the conversation. So he said to CBS, I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decreases it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing. And then this is, hold for processing. Here is Stephen Miller on that and on the Doge cuts. He says, I've seen a few claims making the rounds in the big, beautiful bill that require correction. The first is that it doesn't codify the Doge cuts. A reconciliation bill, which is a budget bill that passes with 50 votes, is limited by Senate rules to mandatory spending only. For instance, Medicaid and food stamps. The Senate rules prevent it from cutting discretionary spending, e.g., the Department of Education or federal grants. The Doge cuts are overwhelmingly discretionary, not mandatory. The bill saves more than $1.6 trillion in mandatory spending, including the largest ever welfare reform, a remarkable achievement. I've also seen claims the bill increases the deficit. This lie is based on a CBO accounting gimmick. Income tax rates for the 2017 tax cut are set to expire in September. They were always planned to be permanent. CBO says maintaining current tax rates adds to the deficit, but by definition, leaving these income tax rates unchanged cannot add 1 penny to the deficit. The bill's spending cuts reduce the deficit against the current law baseline, which is the only correct baseline to use. Okay. So the accounting trick here is that they basically calculate how much this is going to add to the deficit as though the tax cuts were going to expire. And then they just add the amount of the tax cut itself on and say that's new deficit spending. Another fantastically false claim is that the bill spends trillions of dollars. This is just completely invented out of whole cloth. This is not a 10-year budget bill. It doesn't fund almost any operations of government, which are funded in the annual budget bills, which this is not. In other words, if this bill is passed, but the annual budget bill is not, there would be no government funding. Under the math that critics are using, if we passed a one-paragraph reconciliation bill that cut simply $50 billion in food stamp spending, they would say the bill added trillions in spending and debt because they are counting all the projected federal spending that exists entirely outside the scope of this legislation, which of course is preposterous. The only funding in the bill is for the president's border and defense priorities while enacting a net spending cut of over $1.6 trillion. The bill has two fiscal components, a massive tax cut and a massive spending cut. And that is a substantial argument and maybe a conclusive argument on that. Separating mandatory and discretionary is really interesting because the mandatory spending has to be dealt with in another way. And that's kind of the point. And we may get to the point where rescission and impoundment come into play as far as that goes. Let's see if we can sprint to the end here. Not sure if we can. Yeah, maybe we can. Let's do it. All right. So, of course, there was a hubbub about Elon Musk leaving Doge. They want to paint it as Doge succeeded or Doge failed or whatever. We're going to skip Rand Paul. Rand Paul can be skipped these days. Here is Donald Trump from yesterday on Truth Social. I am having a press conference tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Eastern with Elon Musk at the Oval Office. This will be his last day, but not really, because he will always be with us, helping all the way. Elon is terrific. See you tomorrow at the White House. And as is customary, the press conference began about a half an hour late. And I watched the entire thing, which was quite entertaining because Trump and Elon are generally entertaining together, but we're not supposed to only be entertained. This was one of the most entertaining moments as far as I'm concerned. And this should be made into many, many memes. Elon Musk and Donald Trump staring up at the ceiling, looking at how Trump has altered the presidential seal in the inside of the Oval Office, on the ceiling of the Oval Office, I should say. And here is some video from that from Scavino that he put out. He filmed on his phone within the Oval Office. And I'm going to skip forward here a bit. We'll get the rest of Elon's statement in a second. But so around the room and then up to the ceiling, this is what the ceiling of the Oval Office looks like.
Essentially, it's a landmark, a great landmark. And that's 24 karat gold, and everybody loved it. And now they all see it when they come in. So
that's quite cool. I would suggest we should measure that Oval Office ceiling against potential other Oval Office ceilings we might see in the future. Do they have that up there, or is nothing focused on the ceiling because the cameras never go up there? Very interesting piece of film. And Trump and Elon both spent some time looking at it. I know, conspiracy theory, speculation. We're just having a little fun with this. We'll see how things go in the future. Let's get to a beautiful media trick played by Trump in this Oval Office address. Trump, let's turn that down. That's a bad sound.
he's done a fantastic job.
We're going to skip forward a little bit because Trump brings out, he has one of his comms women bring out a laptop.
From Joe Kiernan and Rick Santelli. This just came out, and we'll just play that for a second.
Personal income is up 0.8%. That is almost triple the expectations. The income numbers, really, for the first 4 months of the year, they're stellar. They're really stellar. I mean, I could go back and look at the first 4 months of many different years. Really very strong numbers, and you're right. This administration is criticized for just about everything under the sun. I've never, ever in my lifetime had glimpses into the politics of an administration in the form of transparency like this one. Why don't we be, give credit where credit is due. Income really shooting up.
Rick, I also thought everybody was going to get one last order of imports that were going to be tariffed, and they were loading up on things. How the hell they already fix the trade, or not fix it, but to cut it in half? That's crazy. So there wasn't a lot of front loading of things that they needed before the tariffs hit?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it really does call into question some of the conventional wisdoms. And, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what happens next month when we get this number, or we see some of the other numbers like current accounts, see how they fared. Because I don't know, I've been watching these numbers a long time. I don't think I've ever seen the trade deficit cut in half in 1 month.
So Trump, like he did a week ago when he showed the video of, I guess the guy's name is Malema or something, in South Africa chanting "kill the Boer" and all the people cheering along with him. He showed that right in front of the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa. And right here, he has one of the most attention-grabbing people in the world right next to him. The two of them together, probably the two most attention-grabbing people in the world, in one little room. And before he even gets into the subject matter of the day, he has one of his assistants bring out a laptop so that he can show this news segment about how well the economy and people's incomes and the trade deficit, how well all that is doing in the first 4 months of his administration. And the thing is, he has a totally captive media audience. The Trump rapid response people, this might be GOP rapid response, put this together. And so this is a collage of the press conference being carried on 16 different networks, including, what do we have here? Let me look at, I'm going to get myself a bigger version of this. Okay, so we have CNBC, Newsmax, CNN, Fox News, Fox Business, CBS, News Nation. I don't know if MSNBC is carrying it. C-SPAN. That's a lot. ABC's down there. So I don't know if CBS, the company he's suing, is in there. But they played the Trump-Elon press conference on all of these various news networks. And Trump, knowing that, decided to kick it off with a Rick Santelli clip talking about how well the economy is doing. So everybody watching the speech on all those networks is getting force-fed that thing that they wouldn't otherwise watch. They were ready to hate watch Trump and Elon, and instead they're just seeing Rick Santelli on CNBC tell them how well everything is going. That's not what they signed up for. So as for Trump and Elon, Trump presented Elon with a key to the White House. And this clip is like 3+ minutes long. So this is Trump talking about Elon, the key, and then Elon responding.
It's coming long into the future. Even a year and 2 years later, you're going to see a lot of the results, and those hundreds of billions of dollars are going to be adding up, and they're going to continue to add. It'll be interesting, really interesting to see what the final number is going to be. But again, Elon gave an incredible service. Nobody like him, and he had to go through the slings and the arrows, which is a shame because he's an incredible patriot. The good news is that 90% of the country knows that, and they appreciate it, and they really appreciate what he did. And I gave him a little special something we have here.
Thank you.
A very special that I give to very special people. I have given it to some, but it goes to very special people, and I thought I'd give it to Elon as a presentation from our country.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elon.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself.
Thank you. See the lock. The lock on this is amazing.
Large lock.
Well, let me say perhaps a few words that this is not the end of Doge, but really the beginning. My time as a special government employee necessarily had to end. It was a limited time thing. It's 134 days, I believe, which ends in a few days. So that, it comes with a time limit. And but the Doge team will only grow stronger over time. The Doge influence will only grow stronger. It's I liken it to sort of Buddhism. It's like a way of life. So it is permeating throughout the government, and I'm confident that over time we will see $1 trillion of savings and a reduction in $1 trillion of waste and fraud reduction. The calculations of the Doge team thus far, in terms of an FY25 to FY26 delta, are over 160 billion, and that's climbing. We expect that number will probably go over 200 billion soon. So I think the Doge team is doing an incredible job. They're going to continue doing an incredible job, and I'll continue to be visiting here and be a friend and advisor to the president. And I look forward to times being back in this amazing room. By the way, isn't this incredible? Look at this incredible. I mean, it's stunning. I think the way that the Oval Office, how the president has just completely redone the Oval Office. It's beautiful. I love the gold on the ceiling.
Thank you. It's pretty nice.
Yeah.
That's been there a long time. That was plaster. Nobody ever really saw it. They didn't know the eagle was up there, and we highlighted. It's essentially it's a landmark, a great landmark, and that's 24 karat gold, and everybody loved it. And now they all see it when they come in. So it's been good.
The Oval Office.
Nobody ever saw it before, I guess. Maybe none of those reporters were ever in the real Oval Office. Oh, gosh, man. Everything is so weird. I wish it wasn't weird. I wish I could agree with all the people that are like, that guy's crazy. Things were easier then. But, yeah, we live in a crazy, crazy world where reality is becoming much blurrier than it was before, and at the same time becoming much clearer in a certain sense. I think I have one clip left here or two, and then we'll get out of here. Ah, yes. Okay. So just quickly to the autopen. This week, Donald Trump said on Truth Social, other than the rigged presidential election of 2020, the biggest scandal in American history is the autopen. Whoever used it was usurping the power of the presidency, and it should be very easy to find out who that person or persons is. They did things that a Joe Biden of sound mind would have never done, like open borders, transgender for everyone, men and women's sports, and far more. Fear not, however, we will bring America back bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. So the autopen does not sound like it's going away at all. That was on the 27th, which I guess would have been Tuesday evening. This is from Fox News on Wednesday morning. Watchdog finds no evidence Biden knew of crucial climate EOs, demands answers on who signed autopen. The pro-energy group is renewing its call for an investigation into over half a dozen Biden administration executive actions related to climate that it believes should be deemed null and void due to them being signed by an autopen without any public comment from former President Joe Biden confirming his knowledge of them. Power the Future, a nonprofit organization that advocates for American energy jobs, reviewed 8 Biden executive orders that it says were significant shifts in domestic energy policy and said it found no evidence of the president speaking about any of them publicly, raising concerns that the orders were signed by autopen and that he was not aware of them. These are not obscure bureaucratic memos. These were foundational shifts in American energy policy. Yet not once did Joe Biden speak about them publicly. The executive orders reviewed include an Arctic drilling ban, a 2021 executive order committing the federal government to net zero emissions by 2050, an executive order mandating clean energy AI centers, and an offshore drilling ban executive order shortly before leaving office in 2025. So all very interesting subjects. Who was in control of the autopen? The answer becomes a little different in the devolution sense, or maybe it was just the deep state, the administrative state, realizing that they had no control over this president and that the president was utterly meaningless. His office was void with him in it. And they just figured they could use Joe Biden's signature and pass their entire agenda through the Congress and the Senate, and use the autopen to sign Joe Biden's signature, making all of those new policies laws. Well, you wanted to know, everybody wanted to know, oh, it couldn't be this big a system. Is totally illegitimate. It can't be totally fake. Can't tell you how many times I heard that. I imagine thousands and thousands of people do not listen to my show specifically because they were turned on to my show by someone. And then I said things like that. And they were like, I can't listen to this guy. Here we are. I think it was probably better to honestly and rationally analyze these things and tell the truth about what I saw over these many years, because here we are at the end of that road, coming close to the end of that road. I think we're going to see the results pay off pretty soon. And how many people will there be in the world who have not ever thought about what it means that Joe Biden was not actually president? Thankfully, we don't have that problem over here. Let's hear Donald Trump address the autopen today. Then we will make our way out of here.
Work here are in talks with Republicans in Congress to go and testify about what they did or didn't do to possibly conceal President Biden's decline. Do you think that Dr. Jill Biden should also have to come in and testify about what she did or didn't do?
Well, I hate the concept of it. It's the wife of a man who was going through a lot of problems, and everybody that dealt with him understood that. And I guess it came out during the debate loud and clear. That was the biggest signal of all. They have to do what's right. The country was there was a lot of dishonesty in the election, as you know, of 2020. That's been now caught. People understand it was a rigged election. And when you go further out, when you see the autopen, I mean, I think the autopen is going to become one of the great scandals of all time, because you have somebody operating it or a number of people operating. Because I knew Joe Biden. Joe Biden wasn't in favor of opening up borders, letting 21 million people into this from prisons and mental institutions and gang members. He wasn't into that at all. And, you know, who signed these orders, proclamations, and all of the different things that he signed that set our country so far back, that was so bad for our country?
With the autopen, how would it work? Like, we're in the Oval Office right now. If there was a group of rogue staffers that worked for you who wanted to advance a bill or an executive order without your knowledge, how could they do it? How do they go behind the president?
Because I'd read your newspapers or your media the next day, and I'd say, well, I didn't approve that, and I would find it. I mean, they wouldn't get away with it for long, because I'd say, I never signed that. Who the hell signed that? Autopens, to me, are used to sign letters to people, because we get, I think they said 20,000 letters a week. And you like to be able, when somebody takes the time to write a letter, it's nice to sort of write back. And autopens are meant for that. Autopens are not meant to sign major proclamations or tax cuts or borders, anything having to do with the border, which is so important. And if it happened on my watch, I would be able to see it, because the next day or sooner I'd be reading about something that I knew nothing about, and who the hell signed this? So I almost never use the autopen. In fact, yesterday I was signing about 81, I think it was 81 proclamations and statements to people that I think should be signed by us. I think when you write letters to foreign dignitaries or presidents or prime ministers, you should be signing those letters, not done with autopens. I understand he signed almost everything with an autopen. It's a very dangerous thing. It really means you're not president. Whoever operated the autopen, and we think we know who that is, and it was actually more than one person, but that's not what the presidency is all about.
If you don't think there's a possibility that Donald Trump just let Joe Biden pretend to be president for 4 years while the deep state and the administrative state ran whatever parts of government that they had power over, I don't know what to tell you at this point. He just said Joe Biden wasn't president. He also talked at length, because Peter Doocy framed an interesting question. How is it possible for all of these things to be passed and put into law without the president knowing? How could this sort of thing happen? Well, there's not too many answers to that question. But one of the answers is that president is kept totally and completely out of the loop on any of that stuff and has no access to that stuff. He's just not there. And then when they do it, he's told not to say anything. And when was the media ever coming to Joe Biden for anything? So there are a lot of possibilities. Obviously, I'm suggesting that this is one of them. I can't tell you that I know for certain that's what it is, but there's a lot in that clip to pay attention to. And I think John and I will probably discuss it tomorrow night on Devolution Power Hour. So I'm not going to go more deeply into it here. I'm going to hit one more Rumble ad before we get out of here. And then I will tell you to have a great weekend. This sponsorship is from Rumble, one that is incredibly important to the survival of the company. When Rumble first started in 2013, they built a platform for the small creator. They didn't censor or have biases. They were fair and treated all creators equally. No one thought platforms would censor political conversation or censor opinions on COVID, but they did. Facebook admitted they fell to pressure from the Biden and Harris administration. Rumble did not. They held the line. They were attacked daily for giving us a voice to talk to you. They're attacked in corporate media. They're attacked in governments like France. They're attacked from brand advertisers who refuse to work with them. Corporate America is fighting to remove speech. Rumble is fighting to keep it. Rumble won't survive with brand advertisers. They don't get much of it. Watching our show on Rumble is the most they can ask from you. But if you really believe in this fight and you have the means, one major way you can help Rumble survive is by joining Rumble Premium. Join the community that believes in the First Amendment and believes in our human rights to free speech. Rumble is offering $10 off with the promo code STUDIO. When you purchase an annual subscription, go to rumble.com/premium and use promo code STUDIO. Like I said, if you have the means and believe in the cause, now is the time to join Rumble Premium. If you don't have the means, we are just happy if you watch us on Rumble. Okay. So, and with that, I think that I will probably clip the discussion on the Dominic Cummings piece and present that as a standalone segment, and maybe do that with the Peter Thiel and Palantir thing. I'll think about it. And that would be over the weekend. So if you see that streaming and feel like hearing it again, go for it. Otherwise, I will be back on Monday next week. I'll probably do Monday, Wednesday, and maybe Friday, but I can't guarantee the Friday thing because I have family coming into town at some point during that day. And so I don't want to promise and then have to withdraw that promise. I should probably know a little better on Wednesday, so I'll let you know. But otherwise, I'll be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What?
In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.